choking this time. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome everyone in attendance. The committee has under consideration the estimates of the Ministry of Transportation for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2023. I'd ask that we go around the table and have members introduce themselves for the record. Minister, when we get to you, please introduce the officials who are joining you at the table. My name is David Hansen. I am the MLA for Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul, and the chair of this committee. We will begin starting to my right, Mr. Getz.
Hi, I'm MLA Shane Getson from Laxton and Parkland, better known as God's Country.
Pete Guthrie, Airdrie Cochrane.
Jeremy Nixon, Calgary Klein.
Tanny Out, Fort McMurray, Wood Buffalo.
Good morning, Cyril Turton, MLA for Spruce Grove, Stony Plain.
Good morning, everyone. Peter Singh, MLA, Calgary East.
Good morning, Pat Rain, MLA, Lesser Slave Lake.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rajan Sani, MLA for Calgary Northeast and the Minister of Transportation. To my left, I have my Deputy Minister, Rayan Lajeunesse, and to her left is Ranjit Dharmalingam. To my right, ADM Dale Fung and ADM Tom Liu.
Morning, Lauren Dack, MLA, Edmonton McClung.
Good morning, Irfan Sabir, MLA, Calgary Buller McCall.
Good morning, Heather Sweet, Edmonton Manning.
Warren Huffman, Committee Clerk.
Thank you, and we'll now go online. I see the member here is online. Please unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Good morning, Leela here, Chesterton Strathmore.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'd like to note the following substitution for the record. Mr. Sabir for MLA CC as Deputy Chair, and MLA Nixon is here for MLA Lovely. A few housekeeping items to address before we turn to the business at hand. Please note that microphones are operated by Hansard staff. Committee proceedings are being live streamed on the internet and broadcast on Alberta Assembly TV. The audio and video stream and transcripts of meetings can be accessed via the Legislative Assembly website. Members participating remotely are encouraged to have their camera on while speaking and your camera muted when not speaking. Your microphone muted, sorry. Remote participants who wish to be placed on the speakers list are asked to email or send a message in the group chat to the committee clerk, and members in the room are asked to please signal the chair. Please set your cell phones and other devices to silent for the duration of the meeting. Honourable members, the standing order set out the process for consideration of the main estimates. A total of 3 hours has been scheduled for consideration of the estimates for the Ministry of Transportation. Standing Order 59.01-6 establishes the speaking rotation and speaking times. In brief, the Minister or member of Executive Council acting on the Minister's behalf will have 10 minutes to address the committee. At the conclusion of the Minister's comments, a 60-minute speaking block for the official opposition begins, followed by a 20-minute speaking block for independent members, if any, and then a 20-minute speaking block for the government caucus. Individuals may only speak for up to 10 minutes at a time, but time may be combined with the member and the minister. After this, the rotation of speaking time will then follow the same rotation of the official opposition, independent members, and the government caucus. The member and the minister may each speak only once for a maximum of 5 minutes, or these times may be combined, making a 10-minute block. If members have any questions regarding speaking times or the rotation, please feel free to send an email or message to the committee clerk about the process. With the concurrence of the committee, I will call a 5-minute break near the midpoint of the meeting. However, the 3-hour clock will continue to run. Does anyone oppose having a break? Seeing none, we will make that announcement at the time. Ministry officials may be present and, at the direction of the minister, may address the committee. Ministry officials seated in the gallery, if called upon, have access to a microphone in the gallery area and are asked to please introduce themselves for the record prior to commenting. Pages are available to deliver notes or other materials between the gallery and the table. Attendees in the gallery may not approach the table. Space permitting, opposition caucus staff may sit at the table to assist their members. However, members have priority to sit at the table at all times. If debate is exhausted prior to 3 hours, the ministry's estimates are deemed to have been considered for the time allotted in the schedule and the committee will adjourn. Points of order will be dealt with as they arise and individual speaking times will be paused. However, the speaking block time and the overall 3-hour meeting clock will continue to run. Any written material provided in response to questions raised during the main estimates should be tabled by the minister in the assembly for the benefit of all members. The vote on the estimates and any amendments will occur in Committee of Supply on March 21st, 2022. Amendments must be in writing and approved by Parliamentary Council prior to the meeting at which they are to be moved. The original amendment is to be deposited with the committee clerk with 20 hard copies. An electronic version of the signed original should be provided to the committee clerk for distribution to committee members. Finally, the committee should have the opportunity to hear both questions and answers without interruption during estimate debate. Debate flows through the chair at all times, including instances when speaking time is shared between a member and the minister. I would now invite the Minister of Transportation to begin with your opening remarks, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you kindly. And once again, thank you everybody for joining today, and good morning. I am pleased to present Alberta Transportation's 2022-23 estimates. With me this morning, as I had mentioned earlier, is my Deputy Minister, Rayanne Lajeunesse, and I also have with me today ADM's Ranjit Dharmalingam, Dale Fung, and Tom Liu. Moving forward is a theme of this year's budget, and it is perfectly suited to Alberta Transportation. One of the primary strategies is to get more Albertans working. We are making investments to grow and expand employment opportunities for all Albertans. Our Driving Back to Work program has been an overwhelming success. This program offers grants to men and women who want to earn their Class 1 commercial license. We will invest $10 million in grants each year for the next 3 years. The grant program makes it more affordable to take the mandatory entry-level training, or MELT, required to earn that Class 1 commercial license. The cost for MELT training for Class 1 drivers is capped at $10,000, and the Driving Back to Work grant covers an estimated $8,900, or about 90% of the training costs. Not only does this program create jobs, it makes our highways safer. The breakdown of funding for commercial driver grants includes $6 million for the Driving Back to Work program, $3 million to support women returning to the workforce and underemployed Albertans, and I was thrilled to make this announcement on International Women's Day, and $1 million towards developing online and virtual reality simulator training methods. This is a valuable program that deserves our ongoing support. It removes the financial barriers of getting trained, allowing more people to re-enter the workforce. Our mandate is also to keep Albertans moving forward on a safe, reliable, and efficient transportation network. And it's an impressive network, covering more than 31,000 kilometers, of which 28,000 kilometers is paved. We also have about 2,500 kilometers of 4- and 6-lane divided highways. Maintaining that network is a big job and is one of the priorities addressed in this budget. The budget includes an annual funding increase of $30 million for general highway maintenance. Albertans have been loud and clear, and certainly in my constituency as well, and they expect highways to be well maintained. Highway maintenance activities include ongoing structural and operational maintenance such as pothole patching, crack sealing, grading, line painting, mowing, and vegetation control, as well as the maintenance of highway lighting. We are also continuing our emphasis on capital maintenance and renewal, or CMR. Budget 2022 includes $1.58 billion in funding over the next 3 years to upgrade and rehabilitate key highways to extend the life cycle of those highways. Investing in rehabilitation can extend the lifespan of a highway by about 20 years. CMR projects include bridge construction, road rehabilitation, pavement overlay, and bridge deck joint replacement. With this continuous level of investment, the highway condition in 2022-23 is anticipated to improve to 84.5% of highways in good and fair condition, and 15.5% of highways in poor condition. In 2020-21, Alberta had approximately 84.3% of highways in good and fair condition, and 15.7% of highways in poor condition. This CMR funding is part of the overall budget 2022 investment of $7.29 billion over 3 years in our capital plan. Maintaining and upgrading our highway network is only part of Alberta Transportation's story. The capital plan includes $3.29 billion for municipal infrastructure support to assist the municipalities in building new required infrastructure. I'm also very happy to report that one of our most popular grant programs will continue. Budget 2022 includes new funding of $25 million in 2024-25 to maintain the Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Program, otherwise known as Stip. We know funding through this program is critical to supporting municipalities in the development and maintenance of local transportation infrastructure. Stip funding allows smaller and rural municipalities to maintain and improve local roads, bridges, and other key infrastructure, and to plan for the future, knowing that the program will continue. Alberta Transportation is also responsible for a number of other grants, all of which will continue to be funded in the capital plan. These grant programs include just over $100 million for the Alberta Municipal Water Wastewater program, $130 million for the Water for Life program, and more than $30 million for the First Nations Water Tie-in program. We remain committed to light rail transit projects in both Edmonton and Calgary, which includes a total provincial commitment over multiple years of $3 billion, of which $1.53 is for Calgary and $1.47 billion is for Edmonton. With this provincial commitment towards LRT, the two cities are also receiving matching federal funding. We are also assisting Edmonton with 3 of their critical infrastructure capital projects, including the 50th Street grade separation over the CPR tracks, Yellowhead Trail improvements, and the Terwilliger Drive expansion. In other parts of Alberta, we are partnering with Red Deer Regional Airport by providing a $7.5 million grant to help the airport attract new passenger and cargo services. This investment will open up new travel options to citizens of Red Deer and area and will increase tourism potential in central Alberta. Also, the town of Sundre will receive a grant for upgrades to its wastewater treatment plant using new and innovative technology. The new technology is anticipated to cost less than using traditional upgraded equipment and could be used by other municipalities for future upgrades. Budget 2022 maintains our commitment to flood mitigation for the City of Calgary and surrounding communities. Construction will begin this year on the Springbank Off-Stream Reservoir, or SR1. This is great news. Alberta's government has committed to a total project cost of $744.4 million, of which $473.6 million is over the next 3 years. After the federal contribution of $168.5 million, the provincial cost for this project is reduced. The project will help protect communities in Calgary and southern Alberta, so we don't see a repeat of the tragic flood of 2013. The total estimated provincial recovery and damage costs from the 2013 flood on the Bow and Elbow Rivers was approximately $5 billion, which also makes this project fiscally responsible. While we are shifting our priorities to capital maintenance and renewal projects, we are committing $1.84 billion for the planning, design, and construction of major highway and bridge projects. This includes the new cost share agreement for construction of an interchange at Calgary Airport Trail and Northeast Stony Trail. A developer is planning to invest and develop a multi-use commercial and retail facility on the east side of Stony Trail in Calgary. Enhancing the existing interchange will provide safe access to the new development. Other investments in Calgary include the West Calgary Ring Road, Highway 201, Bow River Bridge on Southeast Stony Trail, and upgrades to Deerfoot Trail. Other provincial highway network projects across the province include Highway 697 La Crete Bridge, Highway 3 twinning between Tabor and Burdett, Highway 11 twinning between Sylvan Lake and Rocky Mountain House, Highway 40 twinning south of Grand Prairie, and Highway 2 and 40th Avenue interchange near Airdrie. We will continue to balance the need for new infrastructure while maintaining and upgrading our highway network. Doing this will make sure Albertans can continue to move forward on a reliable and efficient transportation network, not only to move people between communities, but also to ensure the movement of goods to store shelves. That's a brief snapshot of Budget 2022 for Alberta transportation. I thank you all for your time this morning, and of course, as always, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Minister. For the hour that follows, members of the official opposition and the Minister may speak. Honourable members, you'll be able to see the timer for the speaking block both in the committee room, up on the wall there, and on Microsoft Teams. My understanding, Minister, is that you'd like block times?
That is correct.
Okay. So you'll have 10 minutes to speak, and then the Minister will have 10 minutes to respond for a total of an hour back and forth, but in 10-minute blocks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But first, may I ask if it is not protocol for the member of the government side who initially begins the question to ask the Minister if indeed she wishes to go block or back and forth?
You can go ahead and ask the Minister that,
I certainly
sir.
would like to ask that, because I think it does offer better opportunity for dialogue if we are able to have an exchange back and forth. I understand your preference is block, but I certainly want to express my preference that we do go back and forth and have a proper dialogue and receive the proper benefit of the communications we can have, so that Albertans get the most information possible and the most valuable information out of this exchange that we have this morning.
I appreciate your comments, MLA Dack, and my preference would be to go with block time, because in my experience it gives me the opportunity to more fully answer the questions that you may pose with more detail. So thank you.
All right, well, I thank you. The decision, of course, is not debatable. I'm aware of that. So thank you for the opportunity, Chair, to have at least asked the question.
I'll try and remember to ask you that every time you get up to speak there, sir. I'll give you that option. All right, so go ahead, Mr. Dack.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, everyone. I look forward to a useful dialogue in block form this morning, back and forth in an open, longer version. I wanted to speak today about the very important issues in front of us with respect to transportation estimates 2022. The ministry is one that often it gets glossed over and is seen as a more of a junior portfolio, but it's certainly not my view. It's critically important and one that touches every Albertan right at home, because of course our roadways and our irrigation systems do come right to people's doorsteps. And as one will note, and I think the Minister has already noted in her opening remarks, one of the things we hear about most often is from our constituents is about the conditions of our roadways. And I note that the Minister indicated that consistently 15.5 to 15.7% of our roadways are rated in poor condition, and I think most Albertans would find that a bit shocking in this province to know that that seems to be an acceptable number, and certainly is something that we should always be aiming to reduce to zero, because the people who are living and using those 15.5% of roads that are in poor condition certainly would like to be part of the 85% that have roads that are in acceptable condition. So that's something we can return to later on in my comments. But I wanted to first of all talk about the actual funding cuts to municipalities for capital projects. In your opening remarks, Minister, through the chair to you, indications were, of course, that there was, government was spending gobs of money on transportation and things were going very well, and there weren't any issues. But of course, that litany of big numbers is not really where the details are. So we'll get down into more of the details and some of the actual things that the government has done that will affect municipalities quite greatly with respect to funding from the province. Now, Budget 2022 enacts significant cuts to municipalities, of which many funding streams flow through the Ministry of Transportation. And of course, in your response, I would like to have answers to questions about a few of these significant cuts. We see that the STIP, or Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Program, that municipalities rely on, is getting cut once again. To listen to your opening remarks, one would have thought that that wasn't the case. However, that is the case. Relative to the spend projected in budget 2021-2022, it will be cut by $18 million, or 40%, through the fiscal plan. What do you say to municipalities, Minister, who are saying you're crippling their ability to fund projects, to fund the local projects? And what do you say to municipalities who are saying you're balancing the books by downloading the costs onto local property taxpayers? This is a consistent theme of this government, Mr. Chair, that costs are downloaded onto municipalities. And it's something that we've heard very loudly and very clearly from our two major cities in particular, that their asks weren't responded to, and indeed what was happening is that they were asked to shoulder a larger load of what many would say is provincial responsibility. Now, page 211 of the estimates shows that last year you committed $124 million in municipal wastewater infrastructure grants to municipalities. Now you're projecting to spend only $73 million. Now that's a 41% decline. So in contradiction to your opening remarks, where you were only talking about big numbers and everything was fine, those numbers actually represent cuts and a significant decline in expenditures to municipalities who are already suffering from much higher costs. And like I said, you're only projecting to spend $73 million, a 41% decline. And municipal leaders who can't get their projects funded under this government are saying it's resulting in lost economic opportunities right across the province. Are they just meant to increase their property taxes even more? Is that the message that this ministry and your government is sending to municipalities? It certainly seems to be a big downloading of a tax burden onto the municipalities that the province is offloading. I'd like to hear your answer about that, because it's certainly a very large question in this province, not only with the two larger centers, Edmonton and Calgary, but all of the smaller cities and municipalities. There's lots of different infrastructure projects that individual municipalities have got that they're wondering if indeed it's going to be up to them to shoulder a bigger burden to fix or remediate or improve them. For example, we've heard from the city of Wetaskiwin that their water treatment plant isn't up to standard. In fact, they're going to start getting fined by the federal regulator in 2 years if they can't improve their systems. And they've come to you to request matching funding, but are not able, or so far have not been able to get approvals. So I'm wondering, what is your message to the city and the people of Wetaskiwin? And is it fair to say that their property taxes might go up to pay fines because your government is cutting funding for wastewater systems? Similarly, I spoke just recently to the mayor of Sandy Beach, Denise Lambert, at Alberta Municipalities Leaders Caucus. And she explained to me how right now the town lagoon is closed and that wastewater must be trucked out at huge expense. And they too, in that small community, are examining their options, and they're looking for provincial help, because these burdens for small communities are insurmountable in many cases, and provincial help is absolutely necessary, yet they're not getting the responses that they would hope. And for example, with this Sandy Beach situation, you can only imagine what the expense is to that community for trucking out their sewage rather than being able to remediate their lagoon and properly treat it that way. So in the lead up to the budget, we spoke with municipal leaders such as Denise and such as the people from Wetaskiwin. And one of the worst decisions this government made, according to them, was to increase the borrowing rate for all new capital projects. At a time, Mr. Chair, when Municipalities are suffering under rising costs, as everybody is right now, with utility costs going up, with insurance costs going up, fuel costs going through the roof. Now we have a further download, a further cost, a levy, a surcharge imposed upon the municipalities by the province at this point in time, and it doesn't seem to be any more than just a cash grab. Between 0.5% and 0.75% on their costs of capital. So it's effectively a new tax on all municipal projects, of which your ministry is directly involved. There hasn't been a default ever on a municipal loan in more than 50 years since the system was set up. So I'd like to ask the minister, what do you say to municipalities when you're cutting their funding and then increasing their borrowing costs? It's a double whammy. Ultimately, this hits property taxpayers. Why balance the books on their backs? So it's another example, this big download.
Thank you very much, member. We'll now go to the minister for 10 minutes of response.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Member Dack, for all your questions. And let me begin by saying that I certainly share your perspective that transportation is by no means a junior portfolio. The work that we do in the Ministry and the Department of Transportation is critical for the safety of Albertans and also for opening up economic potential as we invest in critical infrastructure. And I do thank you for all your questions, and I'll just kind of go through them one by one. First, in regards to the metrics around roads in poor condition, I do want to emphasize that poor does not mean unsafe. These roads are still very safe for Albertans to travel on, and so these metrics, I think you had implied otherwise, but that is not the case. So we'll just start off there. Now let's go right into questions around the Stip grant. The funding for Stip was accelerated from the outward years into budget 2020, and that was all due to stimulus. So in regards to the $10 million decrease from the 2022-23 budget to the 2023-24 budget, that is due to additional funding that was received from the Alberta Recovery Plan that was launched in 2020 and is now winding down in 2022-23. And I did mention that we have invested an additional $25 million in 2024-25 in Stip. And in fact, I will say that when I've had conversations with municipal leaders across the province, they've indicated great happiness at the investments that we've made in their communities. And I remember last year when I was originally first sworn in, I was in Grand Prairie, and there was much gratitude and happiness around the Stip funding that we had made at that time. So I did want to emphasize that there is no cut, as you had mentioned, to Stip funding. Now, in regards to the water grants, you had mentioned page 211 of estimates and a 41% decline. The $44.7 million decrease from the 2022-23 budget to the 2023-24 budget is again due to stimulus. It's additional funding received from Alberta's Recovery Plan that was launched in 2020 and is now winding down in 2022-23. So it was funding that was accelerated into the 2020 budget, and that was done to ensure that these projects were more expediently tackled and also to create jobs. There's been tremendous success with the acceleration of these programs to ensure that we had more Albertans employed. And I know, Member Dack, you had mentioned Wetaskiwin, and we are in discussions with Wetaskiwin, and we are actually considering as well what their application is going to entail. So those discussions are underway. And also, I do want to mention that the Alberta Municipal Wastewater Partnership, the AMWWP, this grant currently supports 83 projects in approximately 62 different rural municipalities in Alberta, and new funding applications have been received from municipalities under this program, and funding for new projects will be announced in the new fiscal year. So we have received tremendous positive feedback around this particular grant, and I know that there are other municipalities, you had mentioned Sandy Beach, who we have to do further engagement with. But overall, I would say this grant program is a success. And if there are any other projects that are coming our way, we'd be happy to discuss. All right. In regards to your question around the borrowing costs for municipalities, I will remind everyone that that function belongs with Treasury Board and Finance, who are actually responsible for all lending activities. So the questions around borrowing costs would be more appropriately directed to that ministry. But just going back to, conversations with municipalities, I know at RMA and Alberta Municipalities, our last meeting that we had with them, there was tremendous optimism around the investments that were made in communities all across the province. And I think even as I continue those conversations on a more informal basis, the notion and the messages that I am receiving as it pertains to transportation is one of, again, gratitude for the projects that have been undertaken, and also continuous dialogue and feedback around other projects that we might potentially look forward to in the future. And I just want to reiterate for everybody in this room, particularly for my colleagues, that I'm in continuous conversations with my federal counterpart, especially as it pertains to the National Trade Corridors Fund, because I'm doing what I can to take some of these projects to the national level and advocate for those federal dollars to come into our province. It's important for our economic corridors, it's important for trade and activity in the local communities, and it's important for all of you who represent diverse constituencies. So I do believe I have answered most of your questions. I also, I guess I do have to emphasize this again in regards to STIP, that adding it to the third year also allows for early approval for municipalities. So the fact that we have this additional funding envelope of $25 million outwards, it's an indication to municipalities to start getting your paperwork together, start understanding what projects you have in your regions and local areas, and get that information together and submit your application. So thank you, Member Dack. If I have missed anything, please do let me know. Once again, I think our conversations with the municipalities, we have a slightly different perspective as it pertains to transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. So the opposition members, you have 10 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Dack.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to continue, and the Minister raised some partial answers to some of my questions, but I did want to delve back a little bit into not necessarily the decision and the implementation of borrowing costs, which the Minister rightly indicates is TBF, which has implemented them, but it's the result of and the effect of those borrowing costs on transportation projects and on the municipalities who would look to their budgets to see if indeed they are able to go ahead with them based on the borrowing costs, which are now higher. And so if we're relating directly to Treasury Board and Finance, we'll stay within the transportation boundaries, but it's the effect of those borrowing costs, Mr. Chair, that indeed has created a disincentive for municipalities to go ahead with projects and significant projects. So, and it's really tough to see how municipalities will go ahead with certain projects when they see such a heavy burden being downloaded on the cost of capital. Now, consider a major project like an LRT. With the Green Line, Calgary would borrow $1.5 billion to build the transit infrastructure and then pay it back over time. And a major project like that, the city would be paying a new $10 million tax every year to the province just to cover the new interest rate surcharge. So I'm not sure why that tax was slapped on major new infrastructure projects like the Green Line. Has the ministry done any assessment on the cost of this new surcharge for rural municipalities and what it means for local road and bridge projects, on water system projects, basically across the board on projects that the Transportation Ministry has on its books, on its construction program? It's a significant increase in borrowing costs, and it has a major impact on decision-making process of municipalities as to whether they may go forward with the project or not. So one would hope that the Transportation Ministry has done some assessment on whether or not this disincentive that's been imposed by TBF will actually be halting projects that otherwise might go ahead. So obviously, increasing the interest rate, Mr. Chair, on capital projects is a disincentive to invest, and it means that fewer capital projects and fewer jobs. And the Minister, of course, was highlighting in her opening remarks that one of the major goals in the strategic plan and the business plan is to create employment by pursuing capital projects that are needed in the province with respect to transportation. But before this new charge was made, and as a ministry deeply involved with funding projects province-wide, I was wondering what economic analysis on that and on the incremental decline in investment per year over this 3-year fiscal plan was done. And if so, what did the analysis show? Surely the Transportation Ministry will know that there's going to be a whole big pail of cold water thrown on projects that municipalities of various sizes would have had under consideration. And it's a significant increase in their costs, and will have probably tipped the balance in favor of not proceeding with some costs, and also indicated in that is that there will be fewer jobs as a result that would be developed through going forward with transportation projects that otherwise would have been affordable. So did the ministry assess the differential geographic impact on the ability of municipalities to cost share projects after this increase in rates? So obviously some municipalities are better off than others. Under this new tax regime, who wins and who loses? Were there synergies that have been developed or collaboration that's been developed because of these new costs that would allow projects to go ahead where otherwise they might not because of the tax increases reflected by this new borrowing rate? So another one of the big losers with this new tax on capital projects is airports. Now, other ministers and estimates said it wasn't their problem. Why ask them? We should ask you. You are the Transportation Minister after all, so I will. Both YEG and YYC borrow through the province, and now they'll be paying more, big time more. And that means higher landing fees, higher surcharges, and this makes our airports less competitive. It makes Calgary less competitive. Can you please share, Minister, what analysis was done on the impact to our major airports as a result of this borrowing policy change? Because this is a significant download in cost. Can you explain how this policy shift aligns with the government's stated goal of making Alberta more competitive in order to attract investment? So anytime there's a policy which results in higher costs of borrowing across the board, of course, will affect the Transportation Ministry. And it's something that was a bit of a shock to all the municipalities that I've spoken to know that they're going to end up having to reassess their transportation projects as a result of the new cost structures of borrowing that this government has put in place. So I'm hoping that there's some analysis that the ministry has done to perhaps at least advise municipalities how they can absorb, or at least maybe have the province absorb some of this. It was a bit of a surprise, to say the least, to municipalities that their cost of borrowing capital is going up, and Transportation Ministry is one of those that really has a heavy reliance on borrowed capital, and municipalities don't expect this shock, and now they have to go ahead and reassess their projects, and I think that a lot of them are having some nightmares and sharpening their pencils to know if they're actually going to be able to go ahead with projects that are often years and years in the making, as the Minister is well aware, Mr. Chair. And I'm wondering, in a time like this, when many projects might be on shaky ground just because of the higher cost of fuel and insurance and construction materials and so forth, that this was the straw that breaks the camel's back and ends up being another delay in long-awaited projects, in particularly the smaller municipalities that were contemplating being able to proceed. Now, as you might know, I come from a smaller municipality of Thorhild, and my grandmother was a deputy mayor there for many years, and of course the grants and borrowing costs to do things, whether it was sewer projects or the lagoon or water or well water or so forth, were always front and center at their council meetings. And I remember many times her speaking about how critically important it was to get monies through from the province in order to be able to proceed. And this increase in borrowing costs, I can imagine, would have made her hair fall out as she was a deputy mayor back then. So I can only imagine what municipal councils of many different sizes are going through right now as they reevaluate whether or not they can proceed with projects that their constituents were promised over the many years and many meetings that they might have had to put them onto the table, and now the rug's been pulled out from underneath them. So let's come full circle again and try to dispel a bit more mythology, Minister, through the chair to you. Let's come full circle now. This government has in fact gutted MSI, which is hurting municipalities and downloading costs onto property taxpayers. Now, that's a big reason why property taxes are going up. Compared to the 10-year average, Minister, MSI is being cut by a third.
Go ahead. Point of order has been noted.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And while I appreciate the honourable member wants to talk about MSI, which is clearly under municipal affairs, I mean, I'm actually quite excited to listen to the minister's response about transportation items. Funding models for other ministries clearly belongs in another room, and I would just hope that the honourable member can stick to the topic at hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to interject, members?
Well, I can certainly say in my own defense that MSI is used for infrastructure projects, many of which are transportation, and it's clearly pertinent and germane, and there's no point of order here.
Okay, thank you. I'm prepared to rule on this. I actually agree that it isn't actually a point of order. The member's time is the member's time. I was actually going, you've got 46 seconds left. I was going to interject right after you spoke to advise you that you might want to change your line of questioning, because you are kind of focusing on municipal affairs issues as well as Treasury Board and Finance. And the minister did remind you of that in her last responses. So it is your time. You can ask the questions that you like. The minister is under no obligation to answer questions that don't pertain to her ministry. So if you'd like to continue with using your time in that manner, this is not a point of order. It is the member's time. So you have 46 more seconds, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, for that direction. And the point I'm trying to make, Mr. Chair, is that municipalities are facing a triple whammy of higher costs, higher taxes, and then cutting of government funding. And there's slashing of general funding, cuts to targeted programs like Stip and Wastewater, a new tax on all municipal projects, capital projects with the borrowing costs they're facing. And I'm just wondering how the minister might explain how this policy trifecta of government's stated goal and the government's strategic plan to create jobs and grow the economy, how that aligns with that policy trifecta, because indeed it seems to fly in the face of it.
Thank you, Minister. You have 10 minutes to respond. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Member Dack, for all your questions. And it was fascinating to learn that your grandmother was a deputy mayor. Clearly, it runs in the family. Let's go back to your very first question around borrowing costs, and I had mentioned before that that is in the purview of Treasury Board and Finance, but I do understand the spirit of your question, and in fact, we know that current economic conditions and our supply chain issues and inflation as well has resulted in many of these projects seeing cost escalation. That is a reality. And that is something that we discuss quite regularly and rigorously within the Transportation Department. But I do want to be clear that when projects do come to transportation, they are approved on a percentage basis, not on the absolute value of the cost itself of the project. So rising costs are implicitly built into that approval process. And in fact, for Stip, we tend to fund 75% of the costs, and for the Water for Life program, it's up to almost 90%. And for the wastewater program, it's almost up to 75%. So again, to reiterate, any cost escalations are built in because we approve on an approval basis as opposed to the absolute value of the dollar amount. You had asked what sort of economic analyses do we undertake within the Department of Transportation when we're looking at projects? And I actually think that's a great question, because I know that when anyone comes to me with any capital asks or any projects that they want to invest in their areas, I always ask, show me your business case, show me your rate of return, let me know what are the metrics, what are the socioeconomic metrics involved. And certainly the projects that we have approved in our budget's capital plan, like the Red Deer Airport expansion, which I'll expand on a little bit further, the airport trail interchange expansion, those questions were asked. Show us your value proposition. How is this going to create jobs? How is it going to unlock economic potential? And I know that certain regions of our province have different considerations, different realities, and it's not an even or level playing field. And I do take that into consideration when new applications do come forward to see what is happening in that particular geographical location as it maybe relates to supply chain or the remoteness of the area that would impact their economics. So we do these assessments. The department is very robust about understanding all the dollars and cents and the rate of return and the safety considerations, most importantly, that are involved with each project. Now, coming to airports, we did make an announcement recently, a $7.5 million announcement to upgrade the terminal, to build a terminal and to expand the runway at the Red Deer Airport. And that was extremely well received by Red Deer County and the surrounding region, because again, the economic impacts and the potential for growth is quite significant. So that is a direct contribution from the government of Alberta supporting our airports. And I know that I do have to also say that during the pandemic, Alberta did advocate for the federal government to provide additional support. In fact, there was quite rigorous advocacy done to do that. And through that advocacy, Calgary International Airport and Edmonton International Airport received funding through the Federal Airport Critical Infrastructure. And in fact, Calgary received almost $57.5 million for runway rehabilitation. And Edmonton is receiving almost $18.5 million for runway upgrades and airfield lighting. I also want to say that right now, Treasury Board and Finance is actually working with the airports on the financing piece, and that work is underway. And because you had mentioned some of the borrowing costs associated with the airport, so we are currently discussing that with Treasury Board and Finance, and that relationship is directly between them and the airports. I also want to mention the Strategic Aviation Council, because that council was set up specifically to discuss some of the challenges that our airports are facing. And there are some great, bright minds around that table that represent, obviously, the airlines. We've got technicians who've worked in industry. We've got academia represented through Mount Royal and SAIT. And their specific mandate is to understand how can we assist the aviation industry, and that also means liaising with the airports and understanding the issues that are there. So how has the government supported airports in Alberta? Well, I just outlined several ways we've done that, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from the Aviation Council to provide us with more direction on what we can further do to assist airports. And I also have to say that I've spent a significant amount of time on the phone and in person with the board of directors of almost all of the regional airports within our province, and we've had some robust conversations around what they need to see and how we can partner together to ensure that we're aligned in terms of our priorities in boosting economic development within the aviation sector. So those relationships are, although they're preliminary, I would have to say they're quite strong, and the conversations and the feedback that I've received from them is not quite similar to what you're expressing today. In fact, there seems to be a lot of excitement around strengthening partnerships with the government of Alberta. I do believe that I do believe that I've answered most of your questions, and if I haven't, please do feel free to ask again, or if there's any additional detail that you want me to delve into, I'd be happy to.
Thank you very much. And member, you have a 10-minute block.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be pleased to continue and hopefully elicit a greater response from the Minister on the questions that I pose. I'll turn my attention now to something that was certainly a very difficult period for all Albertans and all Canadians recently when our Coots border crossing was blockaded by individuals who saw fit to do that and as a means of protesting. And that blockade of that critical infrastructure lasted a long time. And I'll get to some of the details of that, but let me preface it by saying that Budget 2022 also includes the third quarter update for fiscal year 2021-2022. So I'd like to ask about some of the activities and the ministry response during that fiscal year. Now, outcome 3 of that business plan is all about supporting, quote, an efficient transportation system, end quote. Now, obviously, the government failed to achieve that objective when that Coots border crossing was closed. My first question, of course, is do you have an estimate of the direct economic impact of that border closure? And what was the larger indirect cost of the border closure? It was Alberta's only 24/7 border crossing, open 24 hours, 7 days a week, and the only one that was able to process live cattle. Truckers not only decided to end up lining up on either side of the border, but of course many companies decided not even to send their vehicles there, and you had production problems as well, slowdowns as a result. Now, I'm wondering if indeed the government and your ministry in particular has any numbers that they can provide to Albertans who are really wondering, what did this cost us, that border closure? What did this illegal action, this illegal blockade do to our economy, and what are the more indirect costs that you were able to tabulate, or did your ministry has tabulated as a result of this closure? Many Albertans are still shaking their heads that indeed it went on as long as it did, and wonder about the complete failure of your government and you as the transportation ministry to take steps that you had at your disposal to end the blockade. Now, outcome number 2 of your business plan focuses on, quote, safety and security, unquote, of the regulatory system involving commercial drivers. Now, during the Coots blockade, we saw stranded drivers, stranded cargo, but your government did very little, and Albertans were once again wondering what in the world government was doing while our border was being blockaded by an illegal group of people who thought that was an appropriate measure to take to make their point. Now, as far as we can see, the only thing you did was ask Ottawa to intervene. On day 13 of the blockade, we called on you to suspend commercial operators' licenses which is in line with your government's stated goals. Why didn't you take this action or at least announce that was your resolute intention? I know at the time, Minister, through the chair, you indicated that you had to await convictions before taking that action to suspend commercial operators' licenses. Maybe expand a little bit on that and give us the detail to verify that in fact was the case. But at the very least, Minister, you could have but failed to announce that your stated and resolute intention was to remove the commercial licenses of those commercial drivers involved in the blockade. It's a very strong measure saying that you were opposed to the blockade and that you were going to use the tools at your disposal to disperse that blockade and get our border open again and get our economic activity flowing through that border. It was a huge, huge cost. I want to know exactly how much it cost the province of Alberta and our economy, the economic impact directly and indirectly, and of course why you didn't exercise your responsibility to keep that border open using the tools at hand that you could have used but failed to. Now, obviously, Mr. Chair, responsibility for keeping our transportation corridors is it's a multi-ministry affair to keep our transportation corridors open. Yet the minister, as I mentioned, declined to suspend commercial vehicle licenses for those in the blockade, which was a decision that hurt a lot of people who saw this thing going on for days and days on end, and they couldn't make a living. Minister failed to even indicate and project that this was going to happen, no matter what steps she had to take and to get these license suspensions properly put in place, to make a very clear indication to these truckers that they were going to lose their commercial driver's licenses if they continued with their blockade. Now, clearly, Minister had a seat at the table during this affair, a seat at the table in cabinet, of course, as your ministry was very centrally involved. You're asking the legislature to appropriate money, Minister, to keep our transportation network secure, but your track record in this case, one of the most severe cases of debacle in our transportation ministry, where we had a blockade of our major...
Point of order has been noted. Go ahead, Mr. Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The point of order relates to Order 23H and I of the standing orders. The member makes allegations against another member and imputes false or unavowed motives to another member. The member has made allegations detrimental to the person of the minister. This statement made by the member, though may relate to the functions of the minister, also relates to personal matter, and this claim against the member is unacceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Would you like to rebuke it?
I think it's not a point of order. Member was asking about goods, which is an important transport corridor, and he was asking about the impact of that blockade on transportation. So that's fairly within the ambit of this estimate.
Thank you, member. But I do agree that the member is walking a very, very fine line there. I would go into repetition more than inadequate comment. Those questions are definitely starting to drift before Justice and Solicitor General and Service Alberta rather than transportation. I would caution the member to not get personal in his attacks on the minister. We won't accept that at all. So you've asked that question. I would suggest that you go on to another subject so you're not repeating yourself, or I will call you to order.
Thank you for that direction, Mr. Chair. What I will do is ask perhaps one of my colleagues, member for Calgary Buller McCall, to perhaps drill down a little bit in a different direction on this topic of the blockade and the Transportation Ministry's dereliction within it.
If I may, Chair.
3 minutes, sir.
So I will have some questions about the blockade, but only as it relates to the trucking business, because in my constituency and in Minister's constituency, there are many who are in this business, some of Alberta's biggest transportation companies, and there are many who work in this, and they were impacted by the blockade, which illegal blockade that lasted 21 days. Many businesses were impacted, but I will keep it short and only how it impacted trucking. And certainly that's our view, that it is responsibility of the government to collaborate with each other and to make sure that these transportation corridors remain open for business. And Minister also indicated in her opening remarks that it's a priority for transportation to make sure that the economic corridors, transportation corridors, are available and they are efficiently working. In my riding during that blockade, many trucking businesses, they were stranded there against their will. They lost business, and it was not their fault by any means. Clearly, the government failed to end the blockade in a reasonable time. There should have been no blockade at all, and we also know that from Alberta, that's our major trading route. So clearly, trucker lost income, their business was impacted. It was not their fault, and I would suggest that it was the government who was responsible for keeping the highways open, and government clearly failed. That was government mistake, and I would suggest that the truckers, the government owes them compensation for that loss, for their failure. So if there is any money in this budget, I'll have you assessed what those damages were, and will you be compensating those who lost income, who lost businesses due to the government failure to end the illegal blockade. Thank you.
Thank you, Member, and we'll go to the Minister, and that's, thank you very much. That's a perfect example of asking the question without taking a personal attack at the Minister, so I appreciate that. Minister, you have 10 minutes to respond, so if you wish.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm actually very happy that this question came up because, as we're all aware, the Coutts border situation was very stressful for many of the government colleagues, for the residents who are out there, and for the trucking industry, as well as those who were impacted by that border closure that was as a result of protesters impeding some of our critical infrastructure. There's so much that was happening behind the scenes that the public isn't aware of, so I'm happy to talk about that a bit more today, and I will have to also express my gratitude to the Mayor of Coutts, with whom I was in discussions on a daily basis, almost multiple times, to really go over all the things that transportation was doing, and of course JEI and Justice were also playing a very important role in all of this. Now, the first question was around the economic impacts. Now, there have been a number of numbers that have been thrown about, numbers that came from the federal government as well, and I hesitate to speculate on the exact quantification of the economic impacts, because they certainly weren't as high as was suggested by some members of the federal government, because we were very effectively diverting traffic to other border openings like Del Bonita and Carway. And so the assumptions made about the economic losses were based on the fact that there were no crossings happening whatsoever. I don't want to underestimate the impact on those companies like JBS who were impacted because the border was closed, but certainly we worked very hard in transportation to mitigate that. And in terms of the stranded truck drivers, I was in contact with them, and it's very unfortunate, and I do agree with the member, Member Saber, that it was through no fault of their own. It was the fault of the individuals who are blocking the border. They are the only ones responsible for that particular outcome. And in my conversations with these folks, we offered supports, and we had civil society rise to the occasion, particularly faith-based organizations in Northeast Calgary who delivered food to those who are on the other side of the border and assisted. And of course, when some of those stranded truck drivers, as I mentioned, who I was in contact with, did arrive safely home, I expressed my gratitude to them for their fortitude and their resilience during a very difficult time, and we continue to have those conversations. I also wanted to say, as we were in discussions with stranded drivers and those in the trucking industry who are worried about, well, how do we cross the border now? I actually did something that might seem innovative, but something that a lot of us do. I created a WhatsApp group with a number of trucking companies, a number of owner-operator companies, and gave them, personally gave them very regular briefings as to what was happening at the border and what the lineups look like. Because as you know, intermittently, the border would open, the protesters would move aside, and they would open up a lane, and we could get traffic through, and then it would close again. We also know that the situation there was very tenuous at times. There were public safety concerns, and this had a very significant impact on our response. It certainly was within the realm of law enforcement, and they had all the tools within their own toolbox to be able to deal with the situation. And of course, over time, the public became more aware of some very dangerous elements that were evident within that group of protesters. Now, the question was, why didn't we suspend commercial licenses? Well, why wouldn't we have done that if it was doable? Why wouldn't I have rushed to do that right away? There was a problem with that, because in order to suspend commercial licenses, there has to be a number of convictions associated with it, and the whole suspension also relies on progressive discipline as well. And ultimately, to make a long story short, suspending commercial licenses of individuals and companies who didn't have convictions would not have withstood a legal challenge. And it would have been we wouldn't have been able to do it, ultimately. We didn't have the body of convictions that we were looking for to be able to implement that particular policy, so it wasn't something that was feasible. There were other items that we looked at, just for the members' awareness. We looked at safety fitness certificates, suspending driver's licenses, and a couple of other measures, but unfortunately, all of those measures would have required an amendment to the Traffic Safety Act, which was not feasible given the time period that we were dealing with. And so as a result, those particular measures which the member had publicly asked for us to implement were just not possible at the time. And I do want to reiterate, if they were possible, obviously, why wouldn't I have rushed and jumped to that right away? So that is the facts behind what was happening behind the scenes. I also want to say that we had regular daily briefings as to what was happening, several ministries and myself, in addition to the Premier. And transportation, part of our role in terms of trying to provide additional supports, we allocated a portion of land near where the protest was taking place to ensure that we could move protesters off of critical infrastructure, off the highway, into an area that was more safe and was not impeding traffic. Unfortunately, the individuals who were engaged in the protest did not take us up on that offer, and we also provided a gravel pit just west of Coots that was made available to the RCMP in case they needed to move any of the vehicles and they had a place to park that machinery and that equipment. Ultimately, there was a lot of work done behind the scenes, and we used every tool at our disposal. The Critical Infrastructure Act, under those provisions, were also made available to the RCMP. And you know, in our discussions with the RCMP, we were made aware, as I'd mentioned earlier, about critically sensitive elements in the whole operation, and it is not the role of government or legislators to intervene in a situation that could have been potentially deadly. Thank goodness nothing happened. Thank goodness everybody was safe, and thank goodness the situation was de-escalated and disbanded in a way where no one was hurt, and that was always our number one consideration and our number one priority, to ensure the safety and well-being of Albertans. Yes, there was an economic impact, and it was very unfortunate. The exact quantification of that impact really does reside within jobs, economy, and innovation. And again, I don't want to speculate on what those numbers could be, but I am very skeptical about the numbers that were provided by other orders of government. So I think lessons learned from the Coots situation most certainly is definitely when things are within the realm of law enforcement, we should leave things to the experts. Let the RCMP, let law enforcement do their job, and I want to take this opportunity to commend them on their professionalism, on their discretion, on their compassion, and ultimately it was their expertise that resulted in a de-escalation of the entire situation, ensuring that no one was hurt. I had already mentioned the Mayor of Coots, Mr. Jim Willett. I am also going to take this opportunity to extend to him my gratitude as well for the tremendous job that he did in engaging with local residents who were clearly very disturbed and very stressed out as a result of this situation. And he held it together, and he wasn't feeling well throughout that time. And I applaud him for his leadership. I do believe that I have answered most of the questions related to the Coots border situation. I'll just stop or conclude by saying that I'm still in contact with many of the truckers who are impacted, and we do have a good relationship, and I've indicated that if they need any kind of support going forward or any other information, to please do stay in touch. But for the most part, there's an understanding that this is something that is not anybody's fault, and that unfortunately it was a difficult situation for many private companies, and they did incur losses. It was very difficult for those individuals who were stuck at the border away from their families. It was cold, but ultimately my conversations with them do indicate that they understand that this is one of those undesirable situations that happens, and there's no point in laying.
Thank you very much, Minister. I just ask committee members to keep your conversations down. It's getting a little distracting. Opposition, you have just over 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, and all of your staff for being here today. I do appreciate your comments around Coots and the fact that the actual budget line item may sit with JEI in regards to the economic impact. I think my question to you would be, is that given the fact that you've had this WhatsApp group and this conversation happening with people who were directly impacted, are you able to table any idea of what the impact is that they provided to you in the sense of those conversations that you were having with them, the fact that their fuel costs were going up, they were being redirected, and what that looked like? Because I do think that it's important that people understand the overall, the global reach of the impact on Coots. And I do want to follow up a little bit around it as well, because obviously it had a significant impact on the agriculture industry. I appreciate your comments around redirecting to other border crossings. As I know you are aware, Coots was the only border crossing where live animal was able to be offloaded, inspected, and then onloaded again to meet the CFIA requirements for transporting of live animals. That cannot be done anywhere else in Alberta. So redirecting to another border would not have worked. There were conversations and there were asks around setting up infrastructure at other border crossings to allow that to happen. My understanding is that did not occur. And so my question to the minister would be, that was in control of the ministry to be able to set up that infrastructure and to ensure that the ability to do that border crossing and that offloading and onloading to meet those requirements could happen. what was the prevention and the inability for that to be able to occur given the length of this border crossing closure, as well as the fact that it was being identified within the first few days of the border crossing that this was going to become an issue. In addition to that, obviously, getting feed up for our beef producers has continued to have a long-term impact. We are seeing this even today, that being able to get the feed for livestock has been significantly impacted to the point where there are concerns about the amount of feed being available in the province. And so, obviously, that has had some pretty serious impact on the agriculture community. And my question would be is, again, similar to what my colleague was asking about, is there a plan by this government to look at that overall economic impact and that compensation to the industries that were significantly impacted? Because it is unique in the sense that it is the only border crossing in Alberta that has that ability to manage the livestock components. I would think that as well through you and your ministry, maybe you could also update us on what the cost would have been associated with developing that infrastructure required for the offloading and onloading of animal, and ensuring that we had the appropriate staff move from the Coots border to another border crossing with CFIA. And the other inspectors that would be required to be able to do that. Obviously, there was going to be a significant cost associated with having to basically build an additional border crossing and partner with the Montana state. I will move a little bit away from Coots and then I'll pass it again to my colleague, just in regards to
sorry to interrupt, member. That concludes the first portion of questions from the official opposition. We'll now move on to an independent member for 20 minutes of questions. Would you like to combine your time with the minister?
Yeah, back and forth if we could.
And that's up to the minister. Do you agree?
No, we're doing
you want block time?
Yeah, we'll do block time.
No problem.
Yeah.
So you have 10 minutes.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you very much, and thanks, Minister, and thank to the ministry staff for being here today to answer questions. Appreciate this opportunity. And my questions are fairly brief, so I probably won't be using up all my time, but I'll just run through them here, and then I'll go through them fairly slow so you can make notes and be able to respond. And I know that's not always the easiest to do in this type of process, but like I say, I'll just go through it here. I'm going to start with page 167 of the capital plan. What I noticed, and I'm just going to use one line item in particular, is the Lacrete Bridge, but I think the several line items have the same situation. When I compared last year's budget, the 22-23 column, there was $50 million allocated for the Lacrete Bridge, and then I look at this year's budget, and it's still the same amount of money. There's still $50 million, and when I look at in last year's budget, the 23-24 allocation of 70 million, and I look at this year's budget, it's still the same. And so my question is that obviously we've had some serious inflation happening here recently, and I'm just wondering where the money is going to come from to make up for these differences in, with inflation increasing the cost of everything, and if there should have been some adjustment in those line items for this year, or if it's that money's going to come from another location. My next question is has to do with the fuel tax money that's going to be reduced on starting April 1st, and I believe that's locked in for the first 3 months of the first quarter of the fiscal year. And obviously, this fuel tax has traditionally been earmarked for transportation, for highways, and everything. So maybe I just need a little bit of an outline on how that process works. I'm guessing that money just goes into general revenue, and then there's other money allocated to transportation. But I'm just wondering if that fuel tax money, if that's going to affect the budget of transportation. I'll move on to page 203 in estimates 7.2 water for life. What I'm wondering is that I guess maybe some of it's more of a comment. There's several municipalities within Alberta that have you know, in rural Alberta that don't have an opportunity to drill wells for farmers to get access to fresh water. And so the systems that have started to take place, of course, are taking water from rivers, treating it, and then having pipeline systems to distribute it. And I'm just wondering, I look at you know, a municipality in my constituency, Smoky River, that's been having issues trying to get that distribution system set up to get water to the people within their jurisdiction. So I'm wondering about that process and how we could streamline that process so that money would maybe become a little bit become faster and easier to obtain for these municipalities that really need it. Again, some of these areas don't have the opportunity for the local farmers, whatever, to drill a well, but these distribution systems have started when we probably need to maybe help accelerate some of those processes. And then moving on to 7.3 with First Nations. And again, I see you know, a commitment to work with First Nations to provide good water for First Nations. And I know there's probably some federal money involved in that too, would be my guess. And I'm not sure that process too. And I just wondered how many First Nations presently in Alberta don't have access to good, clean, fresh water. I'll move on to page 165 of the capital plan. And I guess similar to my first question on, but this on the Stip funding, it has remained the same year over year, and with no inflation adjustment. I'm just wondering if there's another part of the budget that'll be taken into consideration for inflation, or if that'll just result in less projects that municipalities will be able to do with that funding. And just a couple last questions here. I'm still getting concerns, and I see that you've addressed some of these concerns on Class 1 licenses and the costs to get Class 1 licenses. And in particular, the concerns I'm hearing is from the agriculture industry, where they're not traveling great distances, but they do, of course, have to have the Class 1. And you know, just some of the timeline issues and some of the cost issues with attaining a license that really is not used on long hauls or great distances or crossing borders. And the last question has to deal with foreign workers that are coming to work in the farm industry. Just being able to get just regular driver's licenses for regular pickups. It seems like there is some concerns on that, and they will. Especially the temporary foreign workers, and so there's some issues there, and I'm just wondering if there's any work being done on addressing those issues there. So I'll turn the time over to you, Minister, to respond to those questions, and if there's any back and forth, then I guess maybe I can come back to my time and then go back again. So, but I think that pretty well sums it up anyway. So.
Thank you. Go ahead, Minister. You have 10 minutes.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your questions, and I'll just quickly go through them one by one, and certainly we can reconnect afterwards as well if you would like some more detail. So in regards to the funding for the Lacrete Bridge, as you know, this is a significant project, our first project under the FAST legislation, and I know you had asked about the $50 million that was allocated, and is it still the same? Is that number going to change? When we are dealing with multi-year projects, we know that there are going to be fluctuations, and they are built to withstand these fluctuations. And some of these numbers do have escalation built into them, but always we are monitoring the budget numbers for any extremes. So if there are any extreme escalation in supplies or services or things like that, that will be reflected as we move forward. So right now, those numbers stand as they are, and escalation have been built into them, but we will adjust as the situation changes. And it is early days because we are still designing the project. We're still doing some stakeholder engagement. There are many things that need to be finalized, and as those elements come together, the numbers will be adjusted accordingly. Now, in regards to the fuel tax, that was a good question. The funds will go to the General Revenue Fund, and there is no impact on the transportation budget as a result of those changes, particularly on the capital budget side. I'm just going to jump over to the Stip funding. I had mentioned earlier that there is a $25 million increase to the budget in 2024-25, and of course we know that inflation is a reality. And again, I had mentioned earlier as well that approvals are based on as a percentage, not on the absolute dollar value for Stip projects. So if costs do go up, government funding approvals will also reflect accordingly as a percentage goes up. In regards to, I know that you had asked a number of questions around water projects, and in particular water projects for First Nations communities. And I do want to elaborate on that in more detail. So we do have the First Nations Water Tyne program, and as you know, and I think you had mentioned, Member Lowen, that the federal government is responsible for funding water, wastewater systems within the First Nation boundaries. And these are conversations that I continue to have with the Minister of Indigenous Relations as well, because obviously we hear from our stakeholders and we hear from Indigenous communities, and they deserve to have a voice about some of their challenges as it relates to water. But certainly a big component of that funding is within the purview of the federal government, but I will continue to advocate, as will my colleagues as well. And certainly have an open door policy to discuss any of the issues around this program. And I'm also in contact with my federal counterpart, the Minister of Transportation, to discuss some of these water issues as well. I'm going to jump over to Class 1 licenses. We've had conversations in the past, and I know that there is a significant issue with a shortage of qualified truckers, particularly in our rural communities, and that is why we had announced this grant funding to help support those who are underemployed or collecting employment insurance to take advantage of some of this government funding to help them get through the Class 1 training. We also are working on some virtual reality training. We have a virtual reality simulator project that we're working on right now that will help those who live in rural and remote communities access training that potentially may be difficult to access otherwise. But there are many issues, and I know some people don't drive trucks for a living. They just need to be able to move their goods seasonally. And the cost of the program is, it can be a barrier for many, and that is the reason why we have this grant in place. And the question has arisen, well, what about those who aren't on EI? What about those who can't afford it? They're doing something else, but they want to get into the trucking industry. So we are currently in the process of redesigning something that would be applicable to those who are underemployed, so that they have the opportunity to obtain a Class 1 license. I had mentioned a $3 million grant targeted specifically for women. There are more women in the trucking industry than you think, and there are more women who want to enter the trucking industry than people realize. So there's a whole program that is being developed right now to encourage women across the province to take advantage of this funding to help them obtain their license as well. And I know that you had also mentioned foreign workers, temporary foreign workers. Now, right now, we have a huge labor shortage, not just in the trucking industry, but in the construction industry as well. So this question has been posed to me by other individuals, and the question has always been around, like, what can we do to encourage more temporary foreign workers to take advantage of these opportunities? And that again is within the federal realm. That whole program is obviously administered by the federal government. But I do know, and I'm sorry, I apologize if I missed this, but I know that with some of our temporary foreign workers who are working here, driver's licenses are issues, and I'm not sure if was one of your concerns. And that is something that I'm going to be talking to the department about, just to get a full-scale briefing on what is happening, what are the gaps, and what we can do from a policy perspective to fill those gaps, because we cannot afford to to keep incurring these labor shortages. If we have qualified people out there who can take up these positions and there's a barrier to entry, whether it's not being able to obtain a driver's license or whatever it might be, we need to address all of those issues. I will come back to the Water for Life program. We are actually reviewing new applications right now, so if that is applicable to municipalities with your constituency, please do make them aware, make your municipal leaders aware, and new projects will be announced in the new fiscal year. So this program is stable, it's resilient, it's ongoing, and I would encourage anybody who is seeking additional support for their water projects to please do read the parameters of the grants, reach out to my department or my ministry if any assistance is required, and keep those lines of communication open. I think the name of Water for Life, the name of the grant is so apt. Water is life. It's important that municipalities have the resources that they need. I'm just looking at my notes here. Will there be any future administrative changes as a result of the Alberta Municipalities Wastewater Task Force? Thank you to my Deputy Minister for reminding me of this, because this is very important work that is currently being undertaken by the government as well as our industry members, and they're going to be coming to us, this particular task force, and providing us with recommendations around regulatory approvals, funding processes that are associated with water and wastewater projects by the end of March. And this is important because this means that the system will only get better. We'll have better recommendations, and we're certainly focused on innovation and new technology as it pertains to wastewater projects. So, Member Lowen, I hope I was able to address the majority of your questions, but if not, I would be happy to discuss further.
Thank you, Minister. Go ahead, Member.
Yeah, thanks. And I just wanted to maybe clarify that the temporary foreign worker issue that I became aware of is I think they're allowed to use their nationality license or an international license for, I think, 3 months less a day in Alberta. In BC, they're allowed to use them for 6 months less a day, is what I understand. And of course, when they're coming and working for 6 months or something for a seasonal job on an agriculture farm, then that process has become a little more, it's been kind of complicated and not really that business friendly, I guess would say. It's, obviously a tourist can come to Alberta, and actually millions of tourists could come to Alberta and use their licenses for weeks at a time, and that isn't a problem. But when it comes to somebody that's going to come for months, then it might be something that we need to look into to just make it just a little more effective and a little more free-flowing for the businesses that have these temporary foreign workers for an entire season. So I'll leave my comments at that. Thank you.
Very quickly, my team assures me that those licenses are applicable for 1 year. Yeah, it's 1 year.
Okay, thank you. Are you going to cede the rest of your time, sir? Yes. We'll now move on to 20-minute block for the government caucus. And we'll have 10 minutes. Do you wish to go back and forth? I have to ask the question just to be polite. I understand that the minister may not agree, but
At the minister's purview, if she wants back and forth or block time, I'm good either way.
I would prefer block time. It allows me time to get all my information together so I can answer the questions thoroughly.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Mr. Getson.
Well, I appreciate it, Minister, and your staff, and might I say your technical background being a professional engineer shows in this file. So when comments are made that transportation's a junior file, I don't know how. You have road, rail, air, any linear infrastructure, and if we had a port, you'd probably have a Navy out there as well. So there's a lot of things. My comments, or I guess the questions in this format, are going to concentrate predominantly on supply chain capacity, so page 36 of the fiscal plan, also is page 106 of the business plan. Also want to jump into the MELT program a little bit. Obviously, we've touched on it, and if there are any repetitive items, I apologize in advance, Minister, if you don't need to re-answer questions that have already been asked. But the first one that I want to jump into here is Yellowhead Trail. So again, you understand I'm kind of a one-track mind. We're already talking about corridors and those type of things and really opening up opportunities, movement of goods and services, and we've seen the perfect storm both with a little bit of civil unrest showing the criticality of some of our border crossings. We've seen weather events that have coupled with that. We've seen backup and backlogs on the logistics and transport side when it comes to rail capacities. We're seeing potentially for strike conditions now with that. So again, in your portfolio, it's very critical to make sure that goods and services are moving freely back and forth. So Yellowhead, west of Edmonton, just want to see if there was an update on expanding that and putting an additional third lane in. The other one too, I want to talk about if we can, is talk about a little bit about the supply chain impacts. If we have a dollar value for that of what we've seen and how we can potentially alleviate that with some of the new projects you've been talking about. Logistics and short line rail. So through the study that I was working on, I know you're a big fan of that as well. What are some of the levers, the mechanisms that we can use? And I'm thinking of the Battle River Railroad as an example. We have Oyen and Foremost, which have stepped up there, as well as other economic corridors, potentially the line up to Alaska, potentially utilizing some of the underutilized infrastructure we have in northern Alberta to alleviate rail from heading all the way back to Edmonton and getting out to Alberta's port, which is Prince Rupert. What else we have here? Strategic Aviation Council. So I'm a fan of that. Actually, I'm one of those advisors on that group. So, Minister, thank you again for attending the Alberta International Air Show, of which we showcased aerospace and aviation in the province. Had a bunch of like-minded folks get together and quite frankly had the attention globally brought to our little neck of the woods, and as well as we kicked off the Strategic Aviation Council. So if you could maybe advise a little bit more of some of the inner workings of that and how it's literally going to grow and enhance and bring Alberta up into a place to be for a logistics hub, not to mention just tourist travel, those type of things. Highway 60, Minister. The previous government had a big splashy announcement out in my area. The cameras were there, just happened to be pre-election. The Mayor of Parkland was there. Everybody would have thought that there would have been monies allocated to it. Unfortunately, when we got into these rooms, found out it was just smoke and mirrors. Now, that is a key element to that area in the region. So Parkland County took an exorbitant hit when coal mining stopped. They lost about 25% of their income and revenues for it. They've been growing the Atchison Industrial Park, which is a major hub. When we talk about the Amazon investments, we have Champion Foods over there, plus all the other groups and organizations flocking to that area, quite frankly, because it's a better jurisdiction for tax value. Sits right on the hub of Edmonton and literally is the heart of that area. And we also have the CN rail line, which is there, and we have fire services on one side of it. So, Minister, I'm sure you're aware that this has been on the books for a long time. Coming from the Atchison Business Association, a recent meeting out there, their town hall with the county, this was the #1 thing. So we really need a line of sight, and I'm hoping you can give us some good news here and say that there's been monies allocated and that we will be proceeding on construction works, not just the engineering studies, and an update on the acquisition of the lands. And I think with that, given the other ones are just around the MELT program, I'll cede my time to the outstanding MLA from Fort McMurray Region, MLA Taniel.
Thank you so much, my friend. And thank you, Minister.
It's block time, Tanny, so you just have to ask your questions.
All right. And thank you very much, Minister, and your team for all of your hard work. My questions are pertaining to the region around Fort McMurray. And my first question is around Highway 686. In the northernmost overpass in the Fort McMurray region, there's an overpass that leads to 686, which is with all the great signage, but it is a dead end. Certainly one of the desires of the region are to have a second exit that out of the community after the 2016 fires. This 686 would lead to the Peace Country, which would enable access to an entirely new region that is undeveloped. It would help our forestry and lumber people have access to fiber. It would enable more access to some oil sands developments. It would really be a boon to the economy, as well as it would also provide support for a lot of the First Nations that live in that region who are tend to be somewhat isolated from the rest of the province. I wish to know if government officials have discussed this passage, if this is being discussed in the amongst the leadership, and if this is something that we can see in the near future support by our government or future government that regarding this particular corridor. My second question is regarding Highway 63 north of Fort McMurray. This is the road that, again, accesses many of the oil sands operations. For decades, it was a single-lane highway with high traffic that resulted in many accidents and many deaths. I personally can attest to some of my worst memories responding to incidents on there. In order to enable growth up in that region, as well as enable people to travel from Fort McMurray to these sites in a way that is expeditious, that allows them to travel a little bit faster so that the commute is a little bit more tolerable. I understand that the minister has been looked at and is investing some money into the continued twinning of this highway. I was just wondering if the minister could provide more details on Highway 63 north of Fort McMurray. My third question pertains to the passage between Fort McMurray and Edmonton. So, unlike, say, Grand Prairie, where we can drive, and to the Peace Country, where we can drive along a twinned highway all the way up to, for 5 hours, for 500 kilometers, the road to Fort McMurray is not in that stage yet. There's still 190 kilometers on single-lane highway that I travel. The excuse I've been given by previous administrations has been that that there's multiple routes that that people can take to get up to the twin portion. That said, I don't accept that answer, considering the region provides billions of dollars in revenues for the province and for the nation, that there continues to be a lot of large vessels, as Edmonton is a large manufacturer of a lot of the components that the oil sands need to operate. So thereby it does support Edmonton and the surrounding areas and their industries to provide Fort McMurray with the much needed infrastructure for that is a boon to our economy. And my question is that on the government's radar at all to consider twinning the highway, finishing that twinning, that extra 190 kilometers between Fort McMurray and Edmonton? And again, considering the contributions of the region, northeastern Alberta, myself with the chairs region of Cold Lake, Bonneville, St. Paul is contribute a lot. There's a lot of jobs that are created. There's over 20,000 people that commute within Alberta to the northeast region. 20,000 is a substantial amount of people traversing those single-lane highways, as well as they fly. But these things would certainly make things a bit more bearable on those roads, and as well as it might actually promote some of the people from out of province. There's over 10,000 people that commute from out of province, from across the nation, to the oil sands to work. And if they certainly saw better amenities within the region, perhaps those are some of the things that might contribute to them choosing to live in Alberta, as well as choosing to pay taxes and contributing to our Alberta economy. Thank you so much, Minister, for you and your team.
Thank you, Minister. You have 10 minutes to respond.
Thank you, Member Getson and Member Yao, for your questions, and thank you for your advocacy as well. I know how passionate you are about representing your individual constituencies, and I greatly appreciate it. Member Getson, I'll begin with your questions, and I know we had started with Yellowhead Trail, but I'm going to talk about supply chain first. You may be aware that I am the co-chair of the Council of Ministers, and just recently we had a meeting, I think it was 2 weeks ago, discussing supply chain issues, and there does need to be a national response, because there are things that we can control, and obviously there are things that are out of our hands, extreme weather events such as what we saw with the BC storms and the wiping away of highways and bridges. And luckily that infrastructure was repaired more quickly than any of us endeavored. to expect. There's labor shortages obviously play into supply chain issues. So there is some great conversation at the national level to see how we can address these issues more holistically. I'm also the chair of Westac, and I was actually in BC shortly after the BC storms, and again, these same topics were on top of mind. In regards to what we are doing within the government of Alberta, I mean, I alluded to what we can control and what we can't. So what I can control is try to fill that gap in labor shortages in commercial trucking, and I'd already spoken about the Driving Back to Work grant that will make an impact on the labor shortage piece. And I had also mentioned that I'm working with my federal counterpart to really advocate for more federal dollars to create more resiliency in our infrastructure, particularly for Highway 3. During the BC storms, a lot of the traffic was diverted down south to Highway 3, and it became really apparent how critically important that piece of infrastructure is. So I'm in discussions with the federal government to try to get the entire portion to wind. Wish me luck. That is, those discussions are ongoing, and of course we have other conversations as well. And when I speak about redundancy, I'll come back to Member Yao's question as we talk about 693. Going back to Yellowhead Trail, let me provide an update. So Yellowhead, west of Edmonton to Highway 16, functional design is underway for the widening of Highway 16 from Anthony Henday to Highway 779 to 6 or 8 lanes, and the project will identify and recommend short and long-term improvements to Highway 16 from Highway 779 to Anthony Henday Drive that maintain the efficient movement of traffic along the main line and at interchanges. Now, the planned next steps are to develop improvement options, selection of the preferred options, and that'll happen this fall, and public engagement, which is phase 3, and that will happen in the spring of 2023. The functional planning study is expected to be complete by the end of 2023, so that's an update for you. Just going back to supply chain, I had mentioned the work that we're doing in terms of tackling the labor shortage. Your question was around what is the role of aviation, logistics, and short line railways in our discussions around supply chain. So clearly, railways operating in Alberta also play an important role in supporting Alberta's economic development through their network. We've had conversations about this. We've discussed how the economic corridor development needs to be we should have been working on this a while back, but we're going to start working on it now, particularly in light of everything we're seeing around the fragility around our supply chain as a result of the pandemic, as a result of BC storms, and now we've had this issue at the Coutts border, which has also highlighted the need for more redundancy. Strategic Aviation Council, what is their role? Their role, and you are an advising member of that council, their role is to help advise government as to how we can better support the aviation sector in terms of economic recovery and unlocking additional opportunities for development. And as I'd mentioned before, it's a very robust and very there's a very distinguished number of individuals that comprise this council, so I'm looking forward to hearing more about how they can advise us on how the government can support economic growth and beyond post-pandemic recovery. So the council will consider air cargo services along with other aspects of aviation as it develops these recommendations. Now, moving on to Member Yao's questions. I know we've had conversations on Highway 686 from Fort McMurray west to Peace Country, and I had just talked about redundancy in infrastructure. We have seen that not only do we need to enhance resiliency, we do need to have redundant infrastructure. And I use the word redundant in quotes because I think opening up that corridor in the north would be incredible for economic activity and for providing additional infrastructure to move goods and people along that corridor. Now, in 2011, you may be aware that Stantec Consulting completed a functional planning study for a new 218-kilometer highway link between Highway 88 and Fort McMurray that would create that east-west northern corridor. And recently, I had asked my department to validate the planning assumptions of this 2011 study and update the cost estimate. So we are working on this. It's very early days to comment beyond what I've just said as of yet. But your vision is very compelling, and I'm in alignment with it, and I would love to share more information as we progress. All right. Yes, my deputy minister is reminding me that, and it's a great reminder because I do want to emphasize that we work with with an oil sands engagement committee that have representatives from municipalities and industry stakeholders as well in terms of priorities. So what you were saying about the Northeast being a significant contributor to the province and to our provincial revenues, et cetera, yeah, I mean, that is an apt statement. You can't disagree with that. And I know that the question was, have we considered twinning all of Highway 63 from Fort Mac to Edmonton? We've completed plans to upgrade Highway 63 from Atmore to Highway 28, but currently there's no intention at this point to consider twinning Highway 63 from Fort McMurray to Edmonton. And the reason is that the traffic volumes don't warrant twinning at this time. However, having said that, I do want to have further conversations in light of your comments about the importance of the region to the entire province and the need for better infrastructure for that travel. So we will revisit this conversation. And an update on twinning project north of Fort Mac on Highway 63. This project is in design phase and is expected to be completed by summer of 2022. I know that we have to have more conversations on these particular projects, and I'm happy to do so, but hopefully the update that I've provided up until now will be sufficient to garner more conversation around it. Thank you.
Members, you have 1 minute and 37 seconds to continue your questioning.
I'd like to pass the time on to my coworker, Mr. Getson, please.
Go ahead, Mr. Getson.
Perfect. So thanks, Minister. And, you know, as an MLA representing one area, it's always fun. But the biggest challenge was to try to weigh that against the benefits and the advantages overall in the province on that corridor task force. So again, I can't emphasize enough that northern area. It was one of those elements of criticality where we look at the overall supply chain, where everything seems to be pushing south and into those, quite frankly, those pinch points. So, you know, my constituents will understand when I fully support 683 up north and decoupling that to make sure that we can move those products and materials. Not only was it of a significant importance socially in the impact up there for First Nations communities and otherwise, but literally it starts to garner us capital that you wouldn't believe that could potentially have an overall impact of about 17% GDP for the overall province. And again, when you start looking at the backups of what took place not only in Canada but in the United States with the Port of Long Beach, Port of Los Angeles, then having impacts on what was taking place up in Port of Vancouver, and our northern communities having issues double handling pulp and paper products and the additional transport and wear and tear. Literally, the rail capacity can't emphasize that enough. We need to look at those short line rails. So everything in that northern area you're talking about, Minister, you're spot on. So really appreciate your advocacy in that.
All right, thank you, members. We'll now take a 5-minute break, followed by a 10-minute block with the official opposition. Please be in your seats.
I appreciate your comments around the supply chain. I'm wondering also, because I was cut off in our last block, if you'd be able to maybe answer those questions when it's your ability to do that, your opportunity to do that, just in regards to the cost analysis for infrastructure for Coots. I would like to continue on with looking at the supply chain. So obviously we're hearing that there is a potential rail strike that may be happening, which is already starting to raise concerns in the agriculture sector and access to getting to the border. What is the government's position on the rail strike, and what is the position of advocacy to the federal government to ensure that we continue to have that rail access if there is some form of strike? In addition, have you been working with the federal government in regards to trying to get more rail cars being available? We heard over the winter that pulp being able to access the port was being limited due to rail access. And the hope is that some of that has been dealt with, or conversations have been happening with the federal government around that. The piece that I'd also like to focus on as well is, of course, the Vancouver Gateway. So obviously there was a support to renew federal funding for investment in the Vancouver Gateway in regards to priority roads, rails, and port infrastructure projects that were supposed to go to 2030. That was to address the bottleneck and the congestion that was happening around that area, obviously with the BC floods and the disruption with rail. My question would be are we still on target for that 2030 timing, or has that been shifted? Because obviously that does impact the resiliency of the supply chain and moving Alberta agriculture and forest products to the Asia-Pacific region. In addition to that, the Vancouver port currently has about 250,000 pounds of honey, which is headed for Japan, and it's been sitting at the Vancouver port for about 3 months. The value of the honey is approximately $800,000. Japan is Alberta's honey industry's largest market, obviously outside of the United States, and it seems to be a large problem for the Alberta beekeepers to be able to get their export out of the Vancouver port. It's also been identified that this issue is happening in Manitoba, and so what they've had to do is they've actually had to start using air to get their product out. So I'm just wondering if the minister would be able to comment on some of those supply chain issues, specifically about what solutions are being brought up to address those specific concerns. And I will pass it to my colleague for Bueller-McCall. Bueller-McCall?
Calgary Bueller-McCall.
Okay.
Thank you. I will be really quick. Minister, you're responsible for transportation overall, and that includes different modes, and it's outlined in your outcome one of the business plan. And the key objective 3.1 says that you work with partners to support innovative, cost-effective transportation mobility option for Albertans. I'm sure this includes ride-share mode of transportation, including cabs. And again, there are many in my riding, in Calgary Northeast, your riding, that who rely on that as to earn their living. And I think there are a few things that are impacting them quite heavily. One is fuel costs, other is insurance cost, and I do understand that they do fall outside your purview. But because of these policies, they are becoming less competitive. They are being hit really hard, and I think they want to know that what transportation can do to help them remain competitive. And I think with cabs, insurance is dealt differently. With ride-share arrangements, insurance is more within the provincial purview. So there are questions around that too, and if there are any plans that can help reduce the cost for those operators in cab industry. And I think with respect to insurance, I fully understand that's within Treasury Board and Finance. So the question I have that what conversation you have with that
Thank you,
ministry.
member. That'll have to wait till the next round. Minister, you have 10 minutes to respond.
Okay, thank you to Member Sweet and Member Sabir for the questions. I just want to go back to Member Sweet's questions around the Coutts border and what was done to ensure that we could get some of those cattle loads across the border. Now, we had diverted to Del Bonita, and there was a system set up so that livestock could go through Del Bonita and then get rerouted to Sweetgrass for inspection. I mean, obviously, we would have preferred to have all of that infrastructure built in at Del Bonita, and this is actually within the realm and purview of the federal government. So we did work with Canada Border Services Agency as well as the U.S. Border Agency as well. And we requested this of them in the early days as well, because we knew that there was going to be a significant impact on those who had live cattle and couldn't get across the border. But certainly we did a workaround, a very quick workaround, working with both of these service agencies to make sure that they could get through Del Bonita and through the inspection facilities there. And I understand that there was an impact on those, particularly on the companies, particularly on the beef industry. But I think the workaround that we did put in place, and it was very quick, certainly mitigated the impact. I know it's not perfection, but a lot of this was out of our control, and we were I was very vocal about asking for additional infrastructure, and unfortunately it's not that easy to create, and we didn't really know when the conclusion of the situation at the Coutts border would happen, but ultimately, please know that there was strong advocacy on our side, because it's our province, these are our industries that were impacted, and we were very motivated and invested in a positive outcome for them. In regards to the Vancouver port, and I know that there were a number of questions asked there, and I'm also familiar with the situation with the load of honey that has been sitting there at the Vancouver port for months on end. And this situation, the supply chain issues are very real. And again, there are many aspects that are really outside of our control, but certainly folks there heard from me when I was out there in Vancouver in December of last year as a chair of WestAC. I had posed a number of questions. What are the issues? What can we proactively do, and how can we influence the movement of these goods? And so there isn't a lot that we can directly control, but I do understand that it is an issue, and I've certainly written letters to members at Port Authority and had conversations with them to ask if there's any way that I could assist or advocate. And I know that they had also applied for some funding under the National Trade Corridors Fund and were successful recipients of it to increase their capacity. I think it's their capacity for storage containers. I may be incorrect on that, but hopefully that will enhance their ability to get things moving forward. Now, going on to the CP strike, the potential of the CP strike, I'm deeply concerned about this, and I've had conversations with my cabinet colleagues, particularly with the Minister of Agriculture and Forestry, and we've had conversations with stakeholders recently. I think we probably chatted to the same stakeholders at the same event about the terrible consequences of a CP strike as it pertains to feed for cattle in particular. I know that some cattle feed organizations have indicated that they maybe had a week's supply of feed stock available, and this is deeply concerning. So I do have a letter that I have drafted that I will be sending to the Federal Minister of Transportation. He is also well aware of my concern, and we certainly know that inaction by the federal government is going to lead to devastating negative economic consequences for Alberta and for Canada as a whole, because the whole nation relies on our beef industry to move forward, and railways are a crucial transportation link in Canada's trade-dependent economy. There was a question around additional rail cars, discussing that with the federal government. I do believe my colleague has had that conversation.
Thank you very much, Minister. We can catch up with that at the next round. We'll now move to a 10-minute or a 10-minute block, 5 minutes of speaking time for each of you. Do you wish to go back and forth with the minister? I'll ask the question. It's up to the minister.
No, I prefer blocks, actually.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Okay, Mr. Turton.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Minister, for being here this morning and providing answers to this committee. So I have a number of questions I'm going to ask. So specifically, I'm going to start off with a couple projects in my neck of the woods, and that's specifically Highway 628. As mentioned by the member from Lexington and Parkland, you know, this project was also one of the projects that the previous government had a lot of fanfare about in terms of supporting. I was the deputy mayor for the city of Spruce Grove and was in the meeting when I heard firsthand how it was funded and it was going through just before the election. And obviously the change of government happened and we found out that no funding existed for this project. For the benefit of the hundreds of people that are probably watching tonight or this morning, Highway 628 is actually an extension of the White Mud Freeway, and it runs all the way from Edmonton past Enoch First Nation and connects directly to Stony Plain, and is a key priority and key transportation arterial west of the city. You know, obviously servicing all the residents of Parkland County, Spruce Grove, and Stony Plain. So I guess my question to you, Minister, is that does this budget actually support any of those expansions for the White Mud extension? Another project I just want to talk about and ask specifically about is a Highway 19 project between Devon and the International Airport. This is another key arterial here in the Edmonton area. It serves as an outer ring road past the Anthony Henday. And every day there are thousands of people that take that key arterial both to the airport as well as to work at Nisku. I mean, in the late 90s, I used to actually take that road when I was working in the fabrication sites in Nisku. And in the 20 years, I've seen the traffic on that road just continue to grow. Now, I know in the budget it does talk about the east and west sides being expanded, but there's nothing about the middle portion. So I was just hoping perhaps you can touch base a little bit about that. As well as I just want to talk a little bit about some other key priorities in the capital region, specifically on the City of Edmonton's 50th Street project. Now, obviously, this is good news for Edmonton, and so I guess I was just wondering if the minister can maybe highlight about some of the other key municipal grants funded under Budget 2022 for the City of Edmonton. I know that 50th Street quite well, both from taking my own family to soccer games there on the south side, as well as going down to Beaumont. Also, another key priority in the province about the Highway 320 project between Tabor and Burdett. Now, obviously, Highway 3 is as well as another key arterial here in the province, and it serves many value-add agricultural products and manufacturing sites down in southern Alberta. And I know that there's a lot of residents in that part of the province that are obviously concerned about that. So I was just wondering if you can provide an update to the status of Highway 3. Also, another, to kind of go about 5-6 hours north, I was wondering, Minister, if you can provide an update on Highway 28 from to Coal Lake and any work being done on 881. Obviously, that is a key part of the province. It services a lot of oil sands projects in northeastern Alberta, and I know that many residents across the province will be very anxious to hear about any potential upgrades on that project. Just want to touch base a little bit about transportation. I've been very entrenched in the transportation, and especially on public transit over the last 12 years with my municipal background. And on one of the key objectives outlined in your business plan on page 108, it talks about Green Trip and Stip, 52.9 for Green Trip and about 149.7 million for water infrastructure grants. So I guess my question is, how many projects does this funding actually support? And what is transportation doing to ensure that funding continues to be provided to municipalities under the STIP program? And my last question, I know I'm talking quick, but I know there Recently, the ministry matched some federal funding, which is providing operational support for municipalities and public transit. This is obviously a huge interest in my riding and the thousands of people that ride on public transit from Spruce Grove and Stony Plain into Edmonton, as well as the City of Edmonton. I know this was a key ask by Mayor Sohi in Edmonton, so I was just wondering if you could talk about why is this so important for the province and for the ministry to match that federal funding. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. You have five minutes to respond.
Thank you, Member Turton, for your question. And maybe I'll just start with your last question first, or your comments as well, because it's very fresh and it's incredibly good news. The province is matching the federal funding that was announced by the Deputy Minister back in mid-February in regards to providing additional operational funding for transit systems. It was announced in mid-February. We received the term sheet in the beginning of March, and I'm very pleased to say that we very quickly went through the analysis and came together, got Treasury Board approval, and we are committed to matching that federal funding to provide more funds to transit systems across our province that are basically based on population and ridership, the funding allocation. Now, of course, this is contingent on federal approval, and I do expect it to be forthcoming, as this was their announcement. And it was very important for us to ensure that we could provide this additional funding because, number one, it's never a good idea to leave even a dime on the table when it comes to federal dollars. I'm a huge advocate in bringing back that money however we can, whenever we can. And in this particular case, it's critically important. I've always said that transportation is a social determinant of health, and there are many people who rely on public transportation. I certainly did when I was a student. I didn't even have my own car, actually, ironically, until I was in my early 30s. I relied on transportation to get to university, the Circle route. I relied on transportation to get to work. So every day, Albertans, vulnerable Albertans, seniors, people who have disabilities, they rely on our transit services, and it's important that we as a provincial government do invest. So I was very pleased to make that announcement, and I know that you also share a great passion for making sure that we invest in our public transit infrastructure. Now, I'm going to go back to your other questions around the secondary 628 White Mud Extension west from Edmonton to Stony Plain. Now, I'm just going to read some of this verbatim so you have a very good, accurate update. The realignment for Highway 628 west of Highway 60 is not on the current provincial construction program, but it will continue to be considered as a priority as a construction program is developed. The new alignment will replace the existing gravel Highway 628. It will be relocated on a new parallel alignment north of the existing Highway 628, and a design consultant for this project will be selected in the future. And the upgrade of the existing gravel portions of Highway 628 will continue in 2022. And certainly we can have some more conversations about this further. There was another question about the middle portion of Highway 19 that's not being twinned. So just to backtrack, Budget 2022 includes $43 million in 2022-23 for the west segment of the three-way Highway 19 twinning project. The east segment, which is 2.4 kilometers between QE2 and Range Road 253, was completed in September of 2019. Twinning of the west segment, 3.5 kilometers of Highway 19, between Range Road 261 and Highway 60 commenced in 2021, and it's expected to be completed by the fall of 2022. Your question was around the middle segment. Phase 3 is the middle segment of Highway 19 and could proceed when design is complete, all the required land secured, utilities relocated, environmental permits obtained, and of course, as provincial funding becomes available. And I do want you to know that we did apply for federal funding under the revised criteria under the National Trade Corridor Fund, and currently we are awaiting a federal decision for that. I'm just going to jump to, I know you had some questions around Edmonton Municipal grants, but I am just going to jump to the Highway 3 twinning project, because as I had alluded earlier, this project is becoming more and more critical as we talk about resiliency, particularly after observing the extreme weather events as a result of the BC storm. So in terms of an update on the Tabor to Burdett aspect, this was part of the Stimulus Economic Recovery Plan, and the pre-construction work is ongoing, and we anticipate that a contractor will be procured by this fall. So things are moving quickly. And just to throw some numbers out at you.
Sorry to interrupt, Minister. We'll now move to the official opposition for 5 minutes questions and then 5 minutes of answers from the Minister. Go ahead, Mr. Dack.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and through you, sir, I would like to express the hope that the Minister will take to heart something that she said earlier in her comments that really made me perk up when she said that it was, quote, never a good idea to leave a dime of federal dollars on the table, unquote. And I'm certainly hoping that that happens to be a cross-ministry mantra that is posted up in every minister's office, because it certainly doesn't seem to have been government policy throughout the term of this particular government. So we'll watch for that to become more of a policy that's actually invoked by other ministers throughout the government. So that was something that struck me off the bat. But I also wanted to comment quickly on the minister responding about the new transit funding. We saw that the announcements of matching funds for the federal initiative to support public transit, and it's a different issue than Stip, but I would want to know exactly where in Budget 22 is the line item for provincial matching funds to that federal initiative. I don't see one. I also wanted to move quickly, though, to other things and talk about some very important local projects that I have a few moments to discuss. Now, previously, the Premier had promised to Mr. Chair, the good people of Lethbridge, a new bridge over the Old Man River. That's the Highway 3 bridge. Now, during public accounts with the Transportation Ministry, we heard that there was 0 work plans by the Ministry to replace the bridge last year. Now, that was a promise made and a promise broken, because in the Budget 22 capital plan, I'm wondering if there is funding for a replacement bridge over the Old Man River in Lethbridge. Now, the Premier made a promise for this new bridge. Has that promise been rescinded? And why are the people of Lethbridge being left out? They are certainly wondering if they are not going to get a bridge, because it seems to be out of the plans of the government. I'd like to ask about some other projects that are possibly being funded, and I want to know if they are actually being funded. Now, Strathcona County is looking for an interchange overpass for Highway 15/830. That's been the county's top priority for years. I'm wondering where it sits on your priority list, and if it's not there, what did it say to the donut communities around Edmonton? Now, secondly, I know the city of Canmore is looking for a pedestrian bridge over Highway 1 as a priority. It would help with safety, tourism, and it has real value now. Is that project funded in your budget? If not, why not? Now, Mr. Turton mentioned Highway 628 from 231st Street, Edmonton city limits. Now, once again, this project was announced in 2019. What happened, though, was that the previous government, NDP government, had approved the funding, but your government yanked it. So indeed, the project is, I agree, very, very important one, and is an economic driver. It used to be my commuting route because I lived on an acreage not too far off of Highway 628. It's a highway public safety issue. It relieves congestion on 16 and 16A. The roadbed is soft, and it's been difficult to maintain for many years, even at the lower traffic volume. So it's a project whose time has passed. It's long since past time since that project should have been started, and I think you should take our lead and actually continue on with the funding to get that project ongoing. It's a huge economic development driver for the area west of Edmonton, and it should be undertaken, and hopefully you will be planning to do that. Also, you spoke earlier about how important it was to make sure that those roads in poor conditions throughout the province were maintained, and you indicated that poor condition didn't mean unsafe. Well, I beg to differ in some of the cases, Madam Minister, because I know that the roads that I've driven, particularly Highway 55, east of Athabasca to Highway 63, is in terrible condition. They've been begging and whining and trying to get the ministry to repair to a safe condition that highway, but to no avail so far. There have been some attempts, but it's really still, and I've driven it, there's a big rut down the center line, and it's really is unsafe for commuters as well as for commercial drivers. There's the Highway 881, the Kiera project, traffic concerns. They're developing the south end rather than the north end of Highway 881, and with the additional traffic load, the community...
Thank you very much, and I would encourage the member to direct your questions through the chair at all times, please. Minister, you have 5 minutes to respond.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to go back to answer a question that I didn't get an opportunity to answer that was posed by Member Saber, and that was around the rideshare industry and some of the insurance issues that are experienced by our taxi drivers. And I do want to reassure the member, and he knows I've had much engagement with industry members and drivers, and more recently I took their concerns directly to the Minister of Finance. We were at the McDougall Centre, and I had invited a number of individuals representing different companies to come directly express their concerns, because as you're aware, insurance is also under the purview of Treasury Board and Finance. And we had a very articulate group of people who expressed their concerns directly as it pertains to no-fault insurance, and they also provided some innovative recommendations that are with the Minister right now. So I do understand that these issues are real, and they impact the ability to earn what these drivers had earned before because of insurance costs, but rest assured to anybody who may be listening that these concerns have been relayed directly to the Minister who's responsible for the insurance file. I just wanted to make sure I took an opportunity to address that question. Now, Member Dack, you had asked questions about the Old Man River Bridge. And actually before that, you had asked a question about public transit. Where in Budget 2022 is this additional operational funding included? And as a matter of fact, it is not in the budget. I had mentioned that the Deputy Prime Minister had announced the additional funding for operational dollars for transit infrastructure in mid-February, February 17th to be exact, and we had already developed our budget, so obviously there was no opportunity or even possibility to add this in the budget at that time. So you won't find this funding, the $79 million, in budget documents everywhere. However, they will be included in the budget, and they will be included in current year's budget. So that is the answer to that question. Highway 3, Old Man River Bridge replacement in Lethbridge. So just to backtrack again and provide some history. In 2017, Alberta Transportation did undertake a $4 million rehabilitation work on the bridge to extend the life of the existing bridge structure for another 10 to 13 years. Now, right now, if we were to replace that bridge, Highway 3 bridge over the Old Man River, the current estimate is at $107 million, and right now it is considered a future project outside the 3-year construction program. And so that is the update on this project, and if we have any other developments that will take place on this particular piece of infrastructure, I will surely inform you. There was also a question around, pardon me, what is being done at the intersection of Highway 16 and Highway 830 Range Road 214. So we all know that Alberta's industrial heartland is a major economic driver for both this region and in fact the entire province. And I'm very pleased and happy that we're seeing additional investments come through to the heartland area, and I could rattle them off, but you all know of them, and certainly Dow Chemicals is the one that stands out. The advent of these recent energy development projects that have been announced means that we're going to see increased growth in the region, and that's going to obviously affect current road and bridge infrastructure. In 2017, a Highway 15 functional planning study identified that an interchange and grade separation of the intersection with the Canadian National or the CN Rail line would be needed in the long term. So we know that this study has indicated that, and when warranted, based on development and rail traffic. So constructing an interchange at Highway 15 and Highway 830 intersection, it will take 6 years from engineering to construction completion at an estimated cost of $164 million. The engineering could begin in 2022-23, and construction funding would need to be requested in a future capital plan submission. We know, as I mentioned before, that the industrial heartland is very critical to Alberta's economic growth.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now move on to block time with the Government Caucus. Go ahead, Mr. Wren.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for coming here today, and thanks to all your other department members who accompanied you to help us out. I wanted to talk about Safe Roads. Budget 2022 reflects the continued implementation of Safe Roads Alberta with $9.3 million allocated in 2022-23 as seen on page 205 of the estimates. Objective 2.3 also states implement safety strategies, promote traffic safety, and prevent transportation-related deaths and serious injuries. The ministry fact sheet describes Safe Roads Alberta as the new adjudication branch to address impaired driving violations, allow drivers to pay fees online, request more time to pay, or dispute their sanction or vehicle seizure. My question is, did the shift to an administrative model mean Alberta is not taking a tough enough stance on impaired driving? And also, is the ministry seeing success with Safe Roads Alberta in reducing impaired driving on the roads? Also, on December 1st, 2020, changes to impaired driving related contraventions under the Traffic Safety Act were transferred from the courts to Safe Roads Alberta. On page 105 of the business plan, it also says that Safe Roads Alberta ensures Albertans have quick access to a fair and efficient process. Has the new model actually resulted in an improved access for Albertans? And on the other hand, what impact has there been to justice system capacity? I'd like to talk a little bit about red tape reduction. It is good to see on page 106 of the business plan that the ministry is on track to meet its red tape reduction target of 33%, well in advance of the Government of Alberta's 2023 deadline. What are some examples of red tape reduction that have come from the ministry specific to commercial carriers? Objective 3.4 says reduce red tape and regulatory burden for Albertans. I know from my constituents, they're very disappointed in the former government getting more and more red tape involved in many of the departments, and I commend you and your department for doing a great job on reducing it. So I recall that one of the regulations the government has cut out was a regulation that prohibited the transportation of eggs on provincial highways. Are there any other regulations that may have at one time made sense but today seem utterly silly? I'd also like to talk about a little bit about highways in my constituency. We have a number of highways that need repair. I know the former transportation minister committed to paving on Highway 2 summers ago. Last summer we talked to your department, and you guys also were talking about it would happen last year, and lo and behold, it didn't get done by the contractor. There was some delays and things. So many of my constituents are concerned and upset about what went on. I understand that there are some clauses in the contracts that state that there's penalties and different things like that. My question to you and your department is there anything underway to hopefully ratchet up the seriousness of not completing contracts on time and trying to make sure that this stuff doesn't happen. Because like I say, we have people that are concerned and inquiring to my office still to this day on a regular basis. I'd also like to talk about wildlife crossings. We know that roads attract wildlife, and wildlife crossings are important to ensure the safety of both drivers and animals. On page 105 of the business plan, it states that the ministry develops and implements safety strategies and improvements to infrastructure to build safer roads and reduce collisions. I know that many people up in my constituency, we're a northern area with lots of bush, and we have quite a few accidents. So I want to know what are you doing to protect wildlife crossing Alberta highways now and in the future? And with that, Minister, I will hand the time to you.
Okay, thank you, Minister. You have 5 minutes to respond.
Okay, thank you, Member Rain, for your series of questions. And let's begin with Safe Roads Alberta Phase 1 for impaired driving, which is our administrative model. And the question was, did the shift to the administrative model mean that Alberta is not taking a tough stance on impaired driving? And of course, we're taking a tough stance on impaired driving. We recognize that impaired driving is one of the leading causes of serious injuries or death as a result of collisions. So we do take this very seriously because safety is our #1 priority in our mandate. This program was launched in December of 2020, and it's been a resounding success. Along with the new administrative model, the immediate roadside sanctions program was also provided or introduced at that time to provide a very comprehensive array of serious, immediate, and escalating consequences for impaired drivers. And this has proven to reduce impaired driving significantly in other jurisdictions, most notably in BC. That is a jurisdiction that we emulated when we put this program together. And in fact, the issuance of immediate roadside sanctions has increased by almost 47% since December 1st, 2020 to December 1st, 2021. And what that really means is that we have had more offenders who have been detected, sanctioned, and deterred since the implementation of Safe Roads, which ultimately improves the safety for all Albertans. So again, it was a resounding success. And just another metric I'll share when you pose the question is the ministry seeing success with Safe Roads Alberta in reducing impaired driving on the roads? Another metric is that in the year between December 1st, 2020 and December 31st, 2021, approximately 89% of impaired driving cases have been diverted from the courts to Safe Roads Alberta. That is successful because we are freeing up resources in the court system and in police services so that they can focus on more serious matters. And this was one of the reasons that Safe Roads was conceptualized and ultimately implemented. I think I have answered your questions around the success of the program, the efficacy of the program, and certainly we will have more to share as we get more metrics put together. I'm just going to jump into, I know you had other questions, and the question around delays on construction projects for infrastructure that is really important to your constituency in particular. I know we've had multiple conversations, and there have been delays, and again, some of these delays are really outside of the control of the government of Alberta. Certainly, we do have penalties in place, and many of you are aware when contractors and consultants go past the timeline of completion, they are subject to significant penalties, and it's in the order of magnitude of over 3,000 per day for late completion. And there's also $500 per day for taking too long on a site. So these penalties are in place to incentivize these workers to complete the projects. And as to the reasons why these delays happen, it's usually project specific, and contractor specifics. I wouldn't be able to comment on the whys, but I do appreciate that this is a very important project in your constituency. And so this is what I want you to know, that we do have safeguards in place to incentivize consultants to get their projects done on time. I'm going to, if you don't mind, to skip over some of the red tape questions you had, because there's lots of silly things that we have looked at, and time is precious, so I'm just going to skip over into the wildlife crossing question. Great question. What are we doing to protect wildlife crossing on Alberta highways? Well, we're continuing to support and work towards implementing infrastructure that will allow safe highways and allow wildlife to flourish, especially in the natural park areas of the foothills and Rocky Mountains. That's very important to all of us in this room. And the government of Alberta is constructing a wildlife overpass right now on Highway 1 near Deadman's Flats west of Calgary. Sorry, it's not right now, but we've decided to do this, so it's happening soon. It will be the first wildlife overpass on the provincial highway system. The $17.5 million contract has been awarded to PME contractors, and the project is anticipated to begin this spring.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now move on to a 10-minute block for the official opposition. And again, I'll just remind the members to please direct your questions through the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you, sir. I'll have a number of questions, and I'll be fairly rapid fire since time is getting short in our meeting. Through you, Chair, 2 days ago, Global News ran a piece about decreasing rural bus service due to rising costs. Now, during the pandemic and as it's ongoing, routes have been cut or reduced in service, and the ministry has done nothing to help, Mr. Chair. Unlike the BC government, which reached out to actually help an Alberta company continue to serve BC routes. There have been layered on costs for insurance, for fuel prices, and now, of course, it's a triple whammy. And I've been in discussion with the minister over the last months about rural bus service. Since the demise of Greyhound in 2021, there's been, I would say, a hodgepodge of routes that have surfaced, but they have left very, very many communities in Alberta underserved or not served at all by bus service. And it's something that is a very critical public safety issue for people needing to get transportation from their community to other places so they don't end up hitchhiking. It's also a medical issue. Many people rely on the bus service for medical transportation, and economic driver as far as being able to take small parcels back and forth using the small bus services. So I know it may not be a sexy issue, but it's really, really important, Mr. Chair, to small communities that the rural bus transportation is supported by this province, and also the province should be engaged nationally with the federal government and other provinces so that we, after the demise of Greyhound, reconstruct a very workable network of rural bus transportation so that it can serve properly using a business model that works and supported by the provincial government where indeed it needs that support to get off the ground. I was wondering what indeed the provincial government is doing, Mr. Chair, to build out that network and support and allow our small rural bus operators to survive through this pandemic period to profitability in the near future. So I'll leave it at that, but it's a big issue, and I think it's really, really important to a lot of Albertans that has not been very much highlighted by this minister. Secondly, a very basic issue, Mr. Chair, to Albertans is the safety of our roads, particularly in the wintertime. And winter road safety is one of the basic responsibilities of the ministry. The estimates on page 207, inventory acquisition, line 5.3, indicates salt, sand, and gravel had an expenditure of $57 million, but there was nothing for calcium chloride de-icer or anti-icer on Alberta highways. And indeed, that is something that has been piloted, and the city of Edmonton and Calgary use the inhibited calcium chloride de-icer in light of the number of freeze-thaw incidents we've had, Mr. Chair, over the past few years due to climate changes. We have had road conditions that have been increasingly hazardous due to ice conditions, and this is a situation which seems to beg for a potential calcium chloride solution. And I really want to know what the minister has in mind as far as seriously collaborating with the suppliers of this material to at least pilot it on a wide scale and perhaps implement the use of inhibited calcium chloride to make our roads safer during the winter months with increasing ice conditions. Next, with respect to construction of our projects that may be ongoing or planned, of course, during the world events with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we've seen lots of different materials either increase in cost or become unavailable. One of those materials is nickel, Mr. Chair, and nickel, of course, is used as stainless steel coat rebar, which is used in bridge construction. And I'm wondering if indeed this either high cost or lack of availability of stainless steel coated rebar is going to actually delay or stall bridge projects in particular in the province. Next, I'd like to ask about electric vehicle charging stations, Mr. Chair. We are looking at a federal government supported program to increase the number of electric vehicles on our roads by 2030. Yet there's no support by the province, but the infrastructure support is also required, Mr. Chair, and that is building out a network of electric vehicle charging stations.
Thank you, member. The minister will now have 5 minutes to respond to your questions. Go ahead, Minister.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Member Dack, for your questions. Now, as it comes to intercity bus services, I know we've had conversations about this before, and I do want everyone to know that the government of Alberta has supported intercity bus operators with the Small and Medium Enterprise Relaunch Grant. There were a number of organizations that did benefit from this funding, and I have also been in conversations with the federal government. In fact, I do have a letter that has been sent or is in the process of being sent to ask for additional federal support the same way that they have provided transit support for operational funding for transit infrastructure. And so that is underway. But I also want to say that I've been speaking to some private bus operators, and in fact, Red Arrow just recently announced expansion of their operations in the central Alberta area. And my colleague, MLA Nixon, had a lovely quote in that press release, and I was also pleased to be able to provide a quote as well. That is good news. That means we are seeing more transit services being made available to those who live in remote and rural communities. It's important, and that is just the private sector stepping up to meet a demand. I also made an announcement last summer, shortly after being sworn in as Transportation Minister, for a company called Canada Bus. They had just started operations, and I met him last night at an event and was very happy to hear that he is expanding his operations as well. And he's won several awards for the work that he's doing. So I do believe as we navigate further into economic recovery that the private sector will step in and meet that demand. Will it be perfect? Absolutely not. So I will keep a close eye on it and will continue to talk to my federal counterparts to see if any funding will be forthcoming for intercity bus services. All right, now we're just going to jump over into highway maintenance, and I do appreciate the members' questions around on safety and maintenance, particularly during the winter months. I do want to emphasize that in addition to the $345 million that has been already allocated, the department has a $57 million budget under the financial transaction vote for the purchase of salt, sand, and gravel to maintain the roads and keep them safe in the wintertime. And we do continue to look at various different materials in terms of safety. And I do have to mention that I had a meeting with a company, a Korean-based company at Edmonton International Airport, and they had a very innovative product that they had presented. It's using starfish byproducts. It's starfish eco-friendly de-icer, and perhaps something that could be used on the roads as well to provide safety. And currently, Edmonton International is piloting this, testing it out as a de-icing mechanism. But this company is new. It's actually run by some very young individuals, and they were very interested in coming to Alberta and testing out their product. And as you can imagine, it's a byproduct of starfish, so very environmentally friendly. It is processed in such a way that it would be biodegradable. And I do have to mention that because as we talk about highway safety and as we talk about innovation, there's lots of exciting things on the horizon. So I mention that for your interest. And again, highway maintenance and safety is, I've already mentioned safety is a #1 priority of the Department of Transportation. So we're always looking at different techniques, different ways to ensure that our highways are as safe as possible. And we've had some unexpected, unanticipated weather events this year. Particularly, just about a month ago, the city of Edmonton was almost seized because we had a terrible snowfall, and then it melted, and then it froze again, and the provincial highways were also very icy at that time. But these are things that we just haven't seen very often in recent years. So they're learning opportunities for us as to how to improve our processes, but ultimately I'm proud of the work that the Department of Transportation does in keeping our highways safe for Albertans, and I look forward to saying more in the future.
Thank you very much, Minister. We'll now move on to a 10-minute block for the Government Caucus. Mr. Singh, go ahead.
Good morning, Minister, and thank you for being with us today. I appreciate you and the Ministry for the works being done to support Alberta's economy, social and environmental success by building and maintaining a safe and efficient transportation system. And my question is on Springbank Off-Stream Reservoir. Objective 1.2 says develop and maintain critical infrastructure to enhance resilience, such as the Springbank Off-Stream Reservoir. The provincial and federal regulatory approval of that project was one of your first achievements after you took over the portfolio, and congratulations for shepherding this much delayed project through increasingly complex review processes. And when can Albertans expect constructions to conclude on the SR1 project? And some criticism about the SR1 project has been that it is in place solely for the benefit of Calgary. And is SR1 one of the supports Objective 1.2? And to my understanding that SR1 is a reaction to the 2013 floods in southern Alberta, which affected communities upstream from the Elbow River like Breck Creek and Redwood Meadows, but also communities downstream as far as Medicine Hat, given that the government is planning on spending $208.6 million on SR1 projects this budget. Could you please describe and how SR1 fits into the broader plan for flood resiliency in southern Alberta? The 2013 floods in Calgary were caused by flooding on both the Elbow and Bow rivers. And is there a plan to support flood resiliency on the Bow River? And now I will move on to, my question will be on Deerfoot Trail improvements. Deerfoot Trail is the busiest road in Alberta. I see a planned investment of $72.7 million for improvements to the highway on page 206 of the government estimates. And what is Alberta Transportation doing to improve the major highway? And will there be a toll on Deerfoot Trail after the improvements are complete? And Calgary Airport Trail, Northeast Stony Trail, on page 159 of the fiscal plan, it talks about how the new interchange on the Northeast Stony Trail and Airport Trail will drive economic growth in the area and help create jobs. And can you please expand on how this interchange supports the priorities of the government? And also West Calgary Ring Road, WCRR, when you look at the page 109 of the business plan, there is still funding of the ring roads in 2024 and 25. Can you provide an update on the WCRR will be completed? With that, I will turn my time to Emily Tutton.
Excellent. Well, obviously, thank you very much to my good friend, Mr. Singh. I guess just a couple additional questions I just want to ask. When it comes to critical infrastructure projects around the province, I know, Minister, you're talking a little bit about some specific Edmonton Capital Region projects, but I also was just wanting to get a little bit more details about the Red Deer Airport expansion. And I'm very happy to see, obviously, that the government continues to support communities in central Alberta. So I know on page 157 of the fiscal plan, I see that 7.5 million is being provided to the Red Deer regional expansion. So I was just wondering if perhaps you can tell me a little bit more about that project. And I also know in that neck of the woods that talks about the Sundre Wastewater Treatment Plant. I know is of huge interest to many residents in that neck of the woods. So on page 157, it shows 7.5 million will be invested in the Sundre Wastewater Treatment Plant, and coming from a municipal background, I know the importance, obviously, of these types of projects to make sure that basic utilities that residents depend on will be there when they need it the most. So at that point, I'd like to turn it over to you, Minister, for your answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you much, Minister. You have 5 minutes to respond.
Okay, thank you kindly, MLA Singh and MLA Turton, for your questions. Let's begin with Springbank, the SR1 project. I'm just going to step back a little bit and just remind everybody that following a public hearing in the spring of 2021, the Natural Resources Conservation Board did approve SR1 in June of 2021. That was not too long ago, and they did deem that this project is indeed in the public interest. And on July 8th of 2021, the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada determined that SR1 is not likely to cause significant adverse environmental effects, and an approved budget of $432 million was established in July of 2017. Keep in mind that was more than several years ago. So in budget 2022, Treasury Board approved an increase of $312.4 million, resulting in a new total project budget of $744 million. And this is a good news story, because we know that the 2013 floods were devastating to residents of Calgary and surrounding areas as well, and this flood mitigation project is vital to ensure that we have the appropriate infrastructure in place should such an incident ever happen again. And I also do have to take a moment to say that we're very, very pleased that we achieved voluntary negotiated settlements with all of the landowners. There was never we never did have to consider expropriation, and I do have to give a shout out to my department for that work, because it was a contentious file for many years and we weren't really sure what it would look like at the end of the day, but it's a phenomenal success story when you reach voluntary negotiated settlements. So just wanted to emphasize that. Now, in answer to your question specifically, Mr. Singh, the construction of SR1 pardon me, commenced in February. Actually, last month. Tree clearing began in February of 2022. Utility relocations to accommodate construction also began in February of 2022. Earthwork construction of the dam will begin in spring of this year, and diversion structure construction will begin in summer of this year. It will take 2 years to build to a functional 1 in a 100-year flood capacity in 2024, and it'll be fully operational in 2025 and be able to handle a similar event to the 2013 flood. And once operational, we will turn it over to Alberta Environment and Parks, who will assume responsibility for managing and operating the facility. So that is the update. You did have a question around criticism of the project, in the sense that it has been put in place solely for the benefit of Calgary. Well, we know that with continuous funding for the Springbank Off-Stream Reservoir project in budget 2022 and future years, our government is clearly expressing its commitment to this project, not only for Calgary, but for surrounding areas. And it will provide flood protection along the Elbow River in Calgary and other downstream communities as part of the overall flood mitigation system. It will protect Albertans and communities in Calgary and southern Alberta, so we don't see a repeat of what happened in 2013. So in answer to your question, it's not only for Calgary, it's for surrounding areas as well. There was a question around how SR1 fits into the broader plan for flood resiliency in southern Alberta. The SR1 project has been designed to work in tandem with the Glenmore Reservoir in Calgary to accommodate water volumes equal to the 2013 flood on the Elbow River. And SR1 is a significant element of the flood management strategy within the Bow River Basin. And there was another question around, is there a plan to support flood resiliency on the Bow River? I can tell you that Alberta Environment and Parks continues to explore options to build additional flood and drought storage capacity on the Bow River. That work is ongoing to reduce the impacts of severe weather events on Albertans and on the economy, because clearly we have seen severe weather events. So Alberta Environment and Parks is leading the assessment of options for flood mitigation for the Bow River. Okay, I'm just going to quickly jump to the West Calgary Ring Road question, and this might be the last question I can answer. My apologies given the time, but this is a very exciting project, and I spent a lot of time visiting on site and asking a lot of questions. So the update is this.
Sorry, Minister, but we run out of time there. The opposition has about 30 seconds to.
Thank you, Chair. Quickly to the Minister through you. Will the Minister give equal time at least to consideration of Alberta-based companies when she's looking at brine solutions to de-ice our roads? I know that the Minister is supposed to meet with the CEO of Tiger Calcium to talk about de-icing roads with their product that uses a foundation in Slave Lake, Lesser Slave Lake to get their
Apologize
brine.
for the interruption, but I must advise the committee that the time allotted for consideration of the ministry's estimates has concluded. I would like to remind committee members that we are scheduled to meet tomorrow, March 16th, 2022 at 9 a.m. to consider the estimates of the Ministry of Indigenous Relations. Thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.